Battletech Exiles by Illuviar. First Chapter 1. Disclaimer: I do not own Battletech, Gundam Seed, or Gundam Seed Destiny. They belong to their respective copyright owners and publishers. This work is not created with any commercial aims. Chapter 1. Exiles. Part 1. Delilah. 1st January 3015, Avalon City, New Avalon, Federated Suns. Medicine and alcohol don't mix at the best of times, even if you invent a reasonable excuse to indulge in either. In my case, I both had more than a compelling reason to drink myself into oblivion, and at the same time, more than excellent one not to risk fucking myself more than I already was. The later was a tiny form cuddled into my side, into all the blankets so only a mop of a curling jet black hair could be seen. That explained the chill I experienced, which was probably what awoke me, combined with a pounding headache and the distinctly unpleasant sense of my gut rising in revolt after last night. I tried to glare at Mia, the little blanket thief, which only served to exacerbate my headache. I bobbed my head at my little sister and got off the bed as slowly and carefully as I could in order to avoid disturbing her, then ghosted to the bathroom and closed the door behind me. A liberal application of frigid water served as a shock to the system and a decent substitute to a kick in the pants. Only then I allowed myself to stare in the mirror. The face that stared back was both painfully familiar yet utterly wrong. And it wasn't the distinctly visible scars along my chin, neither those around my eyes, nor the deep lines going from my temples to hide under my short black hair. It was the big, expressive eyes, narrow, demure, perhaps even cute nose, and a heart-shaped face that, until I went under the knife of those Liao butchers, used to be pretty enough. It was a female face, and the scars did nothing to conceal that. Another clue entered the form of a pair of small, firm breasts and the lack of certain equipment. Yep, not a dream. Well, that wasn't quite right. Optimistically, almost everything that happened over the past few days would turn out to be a dream, a very vivid and realistic hallucination born from a bad combination of drugs and cybernetic implants. I stared bleakly at my mutilated face, which, along with all the scars covering my body, ensured that I could scarcely go anywhere incognito. I wasn't certain I could bring myself to believe such a pleasant lie, no matter how much I wanted to. My mind briefly went back to the drug-enhanced debriefing. It was part of the deal ensuring my protection as a political refugee from the Capellan Confederation, and more importantly, Mia's safety. It was supposed to be a more or less routine interview, a relatively pleasant and painless one considering that I was more than eager to collaborate. After everything, sticking it to the Capellans and House Leo in any way I could. Well, that sounded like a welcome bonus. I was even looking for the debriefing because of that. Silly me. I jerked my head, struggling with my headache, and virtually collapsed on the toilet seat. Ever since the debriefing, my body felt off. Its balance was both right and wrong at the same time, and I had trouble because a part of me expected that my limbs were longer. That was merely one more unintended consequence from the interrogation, and when all was said and done, a sideshow really. The big one? I didn't want to think about it, thus the unwise drinking last night with my minders. It was New Year's Eve after all, and say what you will about the bastards. They agreed that I absolutely needed to get smashed. Another groan escaped my lips, one of the few parts of my face that didn't bear any trace of everything I've been through in either life I could recall. I closed my eyes, hoping that my head will stop feeling like a division of battle mechs played football with it last night. Note to self, don't go trying to outdrink Emio bodyguards. While it's perfectly doable thanks to my implants, after I drank them under the table, there wasn't anyone left willing to enter and talk me off from draining as much of the bar as I could. I vaguely recalled drinking enough hard alcohol to knock out at least a squad of troopers and implants. Notwithstanding, I remain a relatively petite woman nowadays. That by itself was part of the trouble because ever since that bedamned debriefing, I could remember being a man too, one not from around here at that. And even thinking about that royal mess made my headache spike. That's why once I finished in the bathroom, I skulked back to the bed, and before I could think things through, gently unwrapped Mia from one of the blankets, before cuddling her half-asleep form and becoming dead for the world again. The next time I awoke, I felt a lot better. For a few long, glorious moments, I could barely remember the nightmare of the last few days. Then it came back with a vengeance. Memories of battles in a scale unseen from the good days of the Second Succession War. Memories of fighting, and more importantly, dying at least twice before being brought back with cybernetics, not at all dissimilar to those stuck in me right now. Memories from another life. If I was religious, or at least a spiritualist, I might have considered reincarnation, as impossible as it sounds. Being raised in the Capellan Confederation, with an unstable scientist as a father, well, the only spiritualism that was not heavily frowned upon represented the belief that House Liao was for all intents and purposes divine. I could recall buying the party line hook, line, and sinker as I was younger, though all that ended when my bastard of a father volunteered me to be a test subject for his projects. All in the name of the Chancellor and all that rot. Fuck Liao and fuck that fucking father of mine. I cursed in the safe privacy of my mind. My arms instinctively held Mia closer while I forced myself to relax. A few mental exercises helped in that regard, exercises that came from my second, impossible set of memories. Mia stirred at that point. She squirmed in my arms, turned around, and scrunched her tiny nose, which was one of the few features we shared. "Sis, you stink." She grumbled, twisted around, and concealed her face in the covers. "Message received loud and clear," I mumbled, roughed the munchkin's hair, and unentangled myself from the blanket, heading towards the bathroom. Another shower was necessary. I frowned at that, though. I got a shower when I came back last night, right? Another note to self, no more drinking, like at all. A cold shower later, I was wide awake and sitting in front of a mirror built around a set of cupboards, right above a very well-stocked makeup table. Makeup. As far as part of me was concerned, ensuring I looked as stunning as I could when I wanted to was the natural order of things. Why wouldn't I like turning heads? Simultaneously, part of me had no bloody idea what to do with any of the makeup supplies. My head hurt trying to reconcile the two sets of conflicting memories. On the bright side, my arms remembered what to do, and soon I had a light makeup. That made me feel a little bit better about all the scars I could see mutilating my face. The less said about the rest of my body, the better. No more light, almost see-through summer dresses for me. Unless I wanted to scare the crap of anyone who came nearby anyway. Fuck Liao. Fuck the Capellan Confederation. And fuck Father, the treacherous bastard. Very well, Delilah. Get yourself in hand, girl, and stop cursing like a mimetic sailor, or you'll slip in front of Mia. Seeing my face in the mirror didn't help in that regard, so I got up and got myself properly dressed for the day. Not that there was anything to do. After the debriefing, we were practically under house arrest, primarily for our protection. The bright side there was that no one tried to take Mia from her possibly absolutely crazy older sister, because if that happened, I don't know what I would have done. At that point, I had to go get plastered, painting myself in an extremely negative light. Fuck me. I tossed back my head again, trying to find something to think about that wouldn't anger me further or try shoving me deeper into depression. I moved away from the wardrobe and snorted when I saw that Mia had stolen all the blankets, again, and had properly cocooned herself. She was my little rock, the sole reason I kept going. At the same time, a part of me didn't even recognize her, no more than it recognized my face or anything else about my life. Just like I didn't recognize all those memories of war, an arguably much better life before it erupted. That strange Terra, I remembered, it had been relatively peaceful for decades before the war began. The life I recalled, growing up as a man, no less, in the Eurasian Federation, a state that I was pretty sure had never existed on our Terra. Or perhaps it did, and Capellan education, even excellent one, was even more full of bullshit than I suspected. No, bad Delilah. That way lies even more madness, and that's not what you need. My eyes refocus on Mia's sleeping form. It was too long, too vivid to be a nightmare. What did it leave? It is possible I've snapped, hopefully not, but, well, it was the most plausible explanation, though for Mia's sake I hope not. After all, with the Capellan butchers, chief among them Father, rummaging through my head and the rest of my body, sticking all kinds of cybernetics inside, who knew what they fucked up? Or perhaps it was the drugs I had to take to ensure my body didn't reject all the metal and kept working more or less properly with it inside, which was another can of worms that I didn't want to think about. Well, those were options 1 and 2. Number 3, and that rubbed me particularly wrong, well, it was reincarnation, in which case probably it was a combination of the drugs and the implants that somehow jolted loose memories from a previous life. That was almost plausible, or would be, if what I could recall was from our history anyway. It didn't help that, according to those memories, our world was nothing more than a fiction, a game. To tell the truth, I didn't want to go there, ever. Part of me wanted nothing more than to awake from this nightmare, be blithely ignorant, and establish a new life for Mia and myself in the Federated Suns. I could manage. It wanted nothing more than to tear strips from those who hurt me until there was nothing left from them. I wasn't certain who I loathed more, Daddy Dearest, the Capellan Confederation as a whole, or Houselo. Depending on the mood, it could be either. Then there wasn't the new part of me, who was appalled at the way the inner sphere tore itself apart during the last few centuries, and the less said about what it thought as far as what happened to Terra and the Terran hegemony was concerned, the better. Damn it. Part of me was now apparently a Terran patriot of all things. I didn't want to go there either. Various stray thoughts, generally centered around plotting that I wouldn't have thought about before, didn't improve my case. I glared sulkily at the floor, feeling confined, trapped. It has been 3 or was it 4 days now since my debriefing, and if anything, my head was even more of a mess than it was during the immediate aftermath. A knock on the apartment's door startled me, briefly compelling me out of my funk. What did my minders require because it couldn't be anyone else? I stalked towards the door, falling into a combat stance, something I wouldn't have known how to do a few nights ago, ready to spring into action. Miss Vale, we need to talk. I recognized the gruff voice of one of my minders, Mr. Smith, almost certainly not his real name. I went to the door and opened it while placing my body to the site in case of unpleasantness. It was Smith, all right. He wore a replica of his favorite suit, a dark blue one, which was neither too cheap nor expensive enough to stick out in most of the city. I blinked at that, though, which came from the left field. Yes? At least he had bloodshot eyes, so he hadn't properly recovered from last night's drinking. Good. Misery loves company. There has been a complication concerning you and your sister, the middle-aged operative explained in a hushed tone. I narrowed my eyes at him. Not from our side, I'm delighted to report, ma'am. His smile was either genuine or the next best thing. It regards your father. By all accounts, he is dead and well. I stood at the door, gaping like a speared fish. The bastard was dead, or was he? Elaborate, I hissed, and went out into the corridor of the safe house, closing the door behind me. I'm unclear on the details, however. My boss is reasonably sure Ricardo Ling is dead, which brings me to the reason I'm here this early, ma'am. Your father left you an inheritance and arranged for it to be delivered to you through one of the more respected lawyer firms on New Avalon. Alarm bells rang in my head. It's a trap. The possibility has crossed our minds, ma'am. Smith nodded, then looked around. It might be better to continue this conversation in the cafeteria. You look like you could use a hot cup of coffee and a bite to eat. Besides, what we'll be discussing is not exactly secret." "It isn't?" I looked at Smith as if he just spouted a second head. "Walk at me and I'll explain what I've been briefed on. Lisa will be around momentarily with breakfast for your sister." I nodded at that. Lisa was one of our minders. Well, Mia's minder anyway. And the vibe I got from her was of a soldier, not a spook. The vibe I got over the last few days anyway. Before that, she merely appeared like a pleasant older lady, which shows what I knew. No, whatever. While we walked towards the cafeteria downstairs, Smith briefed me. To put it succinctly, while you were recovering, a lawyer firm contacted our government about Leng's last will, or at least the part that concerns you. That much made sense. Kind of. The way we ended up on New Avalon ultimately became public enough, as well as the fact that we were now officially under the protection of House Davian. The media circus surrounding what little the government released about what happened to me was the primary reason I did my best to stay away from any source of news for weeks now. In a more rational world, the publicity surrounding our situation would represent kind of a shield by itself. Here and now, it was a dagger pointed at our throats if we ever lost House Davian's protection. As far as I know, they're clean and the inheritance is real enough. Given the circumstances, we're aware of most details, and I'll be briefing you about them over breakfast." Smith continued without losing a beat. If he noticed my deer stuck in the lights expression, he mentioned nothing about it. "It's a trap. It has to be." That's why we proceed carefully. As far as this being a trap, well, it's possible. Liao isn't the most stable of people or houses in general. My minder shrugged. I snorted at his words. What a charming and polite understatement that was. We got to the cafeteria, finding it almost empty. Jane, my other minder from last night, was over here nursing a coffee. She had a large pot on the corner table she preferred, along with 3 trays loaded with food. Lisa was over there too, coming our way carrying Mia's breakfast. I smiled at her in gratitude, a gesture she returned with a kind motherly smile of her own. "I'll attend to the little one, don't worry, Delilah," Lisa promised, and headed upstairs. We sat on Jane's table, and I couldn't help it but look envious of the curvy, taller woman. Where did the feds find them? Almost every woman I met since I arrived on New Avalon was taller than me, damn it. The redhead elevated a well-sculptured eyebrow my way, then gave Ma a betrayed look. At a more systematic examination, she did appear to be worse for wear after last night. Good. More misery to make me company. "You have no right to look this chipper," Jane grumbled in a raspy voice, which for once didn't sound like melting honey. "There are a few fringe benefits of all the stuff stuck in me," I grumbled, and my covetously grabbed at the coffee pot. It was hot, black, and very strong. I poured myself a cup and absent-mindedly made it Navy Special, with enough sugar that when I put the spoon in, it encountered little trouble staying vertical in the center of the cup. Jane's eyebrows tried hiding in her shoulder-length sensible hair, while I looked questionably at her. She merely nodded at my coffee, and I shrugged. "Mr. Smith, you were saying?" "Well, Legsley, everything appears to be in order. At least that's what our lawyers told my boss's boss." My minder shrugged. "Not my department. We'll provide a trustworthy lawyer who will come to meet you later today to go over the details with you before you meet your father's lawyers if you wish to." "We have it on good authority that you'll want to meet them," Jane added. I took a sip of the coffee, which was like a kick in the butt, thus just right. "You don't say." I gave her a less than amused look. "Don't glare at the messenger, Delilah," Jane chided. "The good news is you're rich." Smith continued. "How much? Well, you'll need to refer to our lawyer, and if you want, contact an outside one to consult as well." "What do you mean, I'm rich?" We got here practically only with the clothes on our backs, and that was really what the dropship crew could spare. My eyes went back to Smith, while my mind struggled to make sense of this. "Eat. Drink your coffee, and when you're thinking straighter, we'll continue." Jane declared, then shushed Smith when he tried protesting. I was getting the vibe that he was like a kid with a piece of news they couldn't wait to share. That was extremely odd as far as he was concerned in my experience. I silently followed Jane's advice. Say what you will about her, she always spoke sensibly, just like Lisa. After polishing off my breakfast and topping it with 2 Navy specials, I felt more alive than I've been in days, or so it seemed. Even my churning mind got a bit more peaceful. Now we can continue. Jane allowed. Well, I'll get the possibly unpleasant part first. You're right to worry about a potential trap. Part of the inheritance consists of a sealed case that arrived this morning. It is DNA locked, and it is currently being examined as we speak. The recommendation from above is to get a blood sample from you. Then they'll use a drone to unlock it at a secure location in case it's a Mechwarrior special or something in that vein. Sensible. I didn't comment on the fact that this way MIIO would know what the case contained before me. If I was properly paranoid, I would say I might not get to see anything particularly important from that case. Not a heartening, though. Then again, it wasn't like I wanted anything from my bastard of a father. On the other hand, if my benefactors informed me that it was an excellent idea to go along, it wasn't like I had much of a choice. This didn't make for a happy Delilah. From what we gathered, Leng has sent you a lot of hardware, probably recovered from the SLDF cache. Smith trailed off when I stiffened. The same cache where he found the implant schematics or the implants themselves, I wasn't positive on which, before he volunteered me as a guinea pig. It was an honor. It was for the betterment of the Capellan Confederation and what the Chancellor would wish, he informed me. I even had believed him before they began cutting me. I shuddered at the memory and closed my eyes, trying to get away from it. Jane hissing something at Smith got me back into the real world, where I found myself rubbing my hands around the scars over my bones. I blinked in confusion. This was the fastest I recovered from a flashback, and there weren't even drugs involved. At that time, I recalled my other memories. This wasn't the first time I once again recalled being cut up, though at least the last time it had been to save my life. That was another mindfuck by itself. Until recently, the implants, what Father did to me, it was only pain and betrayal. Yet, now they were something that I felt made me strong as well. They represented a second chance. Honestly, I didn't know how to feel about that, beyond the obvious. Even more shit than I required tons of therapy over. Sorry about that. Smith sheepishly massaged the back of his neck and refused to look me in the eyes. Anything else? I bit off. How did he do it anyway? We aren't certain. We now know which ship is carrying it, and I can assure you, ma'am, that everything will be checked with a fine-tooth comb before you have to go anywhere near it if you want to in the first place. That's excellent, I nodded in relief. You nevertheless require me to meet the layers? That would be required, yes. Otherwise, there might be legal complications. You might have a proper case to sue us otherwise, Jane smirked. What? Really? It wasn't like any of us lacked the knowledge of my particular situation. Noting my confusion, Jane frowned, then rubbed her forehead. Delilah, we've been over this before. We aren't the crappies. We aren't going out of our way to screw you for fun. She spoke in a soothing voice. I've had that conversation before, and I didn't believe it then, just like I didn't buy it now. Jane cursing the Capellan Confederation under her nose? That being genuine, I could buy. Part 2, Exiles, Delilah. 1st January 3015, Avalon City, New Avalon Federated Sons. A few hours later, Lisa had to pry a grumpy Mia from my side. My little sister wasn't happy that I was going out without her, even if it was supposed to be for a short time. A tray of fresh chocolate cookies finally got her attention, proving that Lisa had learned how to bribe and distract the little ball of energy properly. The downside was that when I returned, I would be dealing with the horror that was Mia on a sugar high. However, that was a problem for another time. Smith and Jane escorted me to an underground garage where an armored car waited for us, along with the rest of my security detail. These were new, relatively young, and very much fit boys. Their suits did little to hide their light armor underneath, or what I was pretty sure were submachine guns. We pilled up in two-car and left the safe house, heading for one of the many government compounds on New Avalon. It was nearly an hour-long ride. The reason for that was simple. We spent most of that time making sure that following us back to Mia would be very hard. That was something I appreciated, even if the waiting made me more and more nervous. At long last, we arrived, parking in another underground garage, built under a tall skyscraper that was all glittering steel and glass. My minders escorted me to an elevator and a fast ride later. We pilled up into a conference room. A middle-aged blonde woman stood at the far end of a polished wooden table, waiting for us. She looked at us, her blue eyes peering over a rimless glass, and smiled. "Ms. Lang?" She stood up, and of course she was taller than me. What did they feed women on New Avalon with? "Yes?" I asked warily. "I'm Linda Hayes, your appointed lawyer, Ms. Lang. Nice to meet you." She smiled brightly. "Hi?" I smiled back awkwardly. "Please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss and a short time to do it." Lisa flung my minders a dirty look even as I walked around to the table to sit beside her at the chair she offered. "How much were you told about the situation we're dealing with?" Hayes asked. I informed her of what little I knew, which earned my minders a second dirty look. While this was an entertaining show, it didn't alter the fact that I was going to get fucked in a way I most definitely wouldn't enjoy. The sole questions were how and why the charade. "This is so irregular it's not even funny, but needs must," Hayes grumbled. "We can confirm that at least part of the inheritance you're about to receive is genuine. The liquid assets anyway. A brief meeting with Mr. Lang's lawyers, a few signatures, and you'll have about 160 million C-bills to do as what you desire. My recommendation would be that the first thing you do is hire an independent lawyer to advise you. Doing so will ensure no conflict in interests when the disposition of the rest of your inheritance is concerned." Hayes looked me straight in the eyes. "You'll need that, I can assure you, Ms. Lang." I just stared at the woman, and I was sure my mouth hung open. 160 million? From my bastard of a father? What? That does not compute. "I'll need details, miss. Or is it Mrs. Hayes?" I inquired, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. "I'm happily married, Ms. Lang." For a moment, Hayes's smile softened a bit, before she was all business again. "Considering your situation, the Federated Sons government managed to lawfully receive access to information about your inheritance. However, if you require additional details, we'll need to meet Mr. Lang's lawyers in person later today. In essence, there is a monolith en route to New Avalon, which will be inspected before it could approach the planet due to security concerns." Hayes paused, allowing me digest the news. A monolith? Weren't those the largest jump ships like ever? How did my father get his hands on one? Why? "Yours and New Avalon security, Delilah," Jane pipped up, and that was a third dirty look Hayes threw at my minders. "That's the reason why you require competent legal representation. Certain parties would like to get their hands on your inheritance, besides the C-bills anyway, and you should at the very least get a fair deal." Hayes continued. She noted my expression, which I was reasonably certain was one of slack-jawed disbelief, and sighed at me. That was happening frequently as of late, repeatedly since we arrived at New Avalon, in fact. What does the monolith transport? Somehow I summoned up the courage to ask and properly shut my mouth afterward. "Well, the jump ship itself is very valuable. It's cargo, too. What we have listed are 4 jump ship coming along, an Overlord, a Mule, Triumph, and Union." I recognized only one of those names. Overlord, those were the distinct egg-shaped ships you could see on practically every movie nowadays. That one at least was big. Yeah, I could see how someone might want all that hardware. At that point, it dawned on me. What do they carry? That's almost as intriguing as the monolith. Hayes shrugged. A lot of battle mechs, aerospace fighters, and support equipment. Roughly a battalion worth of hardware, currently unknown makeup and condition, Smith added. We'll know more after your monolith is inspected. How long will it remain my monolith? I asked, even if I should have known better. That's why you require a lawyer, Hayes pointed out. I bit the inside of my cheek, feeling like screaming at the charade, as if anyone would let me see, much less keep any of this mythical hardware. It wasn't like I would have any idea what to do with it anyway. My head tingled at that thought. A battalion with aerospace support. I had an idea or two about what I could do with such a force, or a dead man's memories stuck in my head pointed at that direction anyway. The prudent course of action was straightforward. Get rid of this complication in order to not offend my benefactors at whose mercy I was, and more importantly, Mia was. Yet there was an uncalled-for treacherous thought. What I could undertake with such a force, how much trouble I could cause to the Capellans. That was my anger speaking. It wasn't something that a young woman like me should ever think about, or worse, contemplate acting on. It wasn't the done thing my upbringing forewarned me. At that thought, a nearly overwhelming wave of rage struck me. Fuck it. Fuck father and the horse he rode on. I took a few deep breaths in an attempt to calm down, while my minders looked warily at me. While strictly speaking, they weren't supposed to be during such a meeting, they were here both for my and Hayes' protection. Among other things, my damn implants made me a combat cyborg, one who fortunately didn't know how to fight. Or at least I didn't until that infernal debriefing. Now, I had a recollection of learning hand-to-hand combat among other things, though I had no idea if I could put it to good use. For one thing, Vale was taller, broader. What would have worked for him wouldn't necessarily work for me. It didn't bear thinking about what would happen if Lisa triggered something in me without adult supervision, so this was as much for my protection as for hers. I'm as well as I could be under the circumstances. I exhaled slowly. So Daddy Dearest made me a millionaire and sent me enough hardware for a modest mercenary outfit, I concluded. This sums it up, and a certain case which is still undergoing testing for anything truly unpleasant. Hayes nodded in agreement. Your government want the hardware, all of it, I stated the obvious. Well, until a few days ago, I would have said that it wasn't like you could utilize it. That's why selling it at a fair market price would have been your best bet, Delilah. Jane shrugged. After that, you could use all the C-bills to enjoy your life, recover, and get Mia the best education and security money could buy, on top of what you're getting as guests of the Federated Sons. My minders were briefed about my debriefing, at least those two were. Was that reason why Smith had been giving me speculative looks over the past few days when he had been simply coolly professional since we met for the first time 2 months ago? Thinking about it, Lisa, my Lisa, or well, Mia's Lisa, had been doing the same, however, until my mind dragged it to my attention just now. I hadn't been particularly observant lately. What? Are you curious about what I can do in a fighter's or a mech's cockpit? I shot back. I am, and it shouldn't surprise you, I'm not the only one. However, to begin with, you need to recover and straighten up this inheritance business. Doctor's orders. Smith shrugged. Do I dare ask? Hayes appeared less than amused. Are you trying to recruit the poor girl? I'm merely curious. Smith rose his hands in surrender. At worst, Ms. Lang might visit a simulator or two if she so desires, but only after her doctor notifies us it's safe to do so. If it was at all possible, Lisa's glare became even less amused and welcoming. Children, enough! I snapped, then covered my mouth, and not just because I was the youngest one in the room. That's the spirit, girl. Jane gave me a thumb up and a brief smile. Why wouldn't this damn nightmare end? Exiles. 2 hours later, after Hayes and I went through what the Federated Sons knew about my inheritance and a few odds and ends surrounding my Alyssum settlement within the realm, it was time to meet my father's lawyers. They were apparently from Spear, and Ivan, an old and respected law firm on New Avalon. A woman in her mid-50s wearing a no-nonsense expensive business suit and a considerably younger man, a few years older than me, came to deliver me my father's blood money. Accepting the C-bills divided into 3 separate accounts took a bit longer than Hayes implied. However, it was indeed just a few signatures on various documents, which we both went over. The legalese went straight over my head, and my new irritating memories were no help there. After Lisa's nod, I did sign. I was supposed to be a millionaire now, yet all I felt was numbness. More paperwork followed, about accepting ownership on the jump and drop ships, along with their contents. It was indeed a battalion worth of hardware, though the precise makeup and models were supposed to be sealed up in the case currently in Mio's hands. This was indeed an irregular way to handle things, yet not without precedent, or so all 3 lawyers told me. Jennifer Spear agreed that it wouldn't be amiss to consult an independent lawyer as well, before the Federated Sons tried to cheat me out of a fair trade about my physical inheritance. She even bashfully offered her services once our current business was concluded. I declined, of course. They worked for my father, which meant that even if they were straight, I didn't want to have any more interactions with them than absolutely necessary. It is possible it was paranoid. Perhaps it was petty. I didn't care. Damn it, there was a part of me that didn't even want to touch the C-bills because of their source. It was early afternoon when we were completed with my father's lawyers. As it turned out, that was just in time to go see the case he left me, Hayes in tow. I didn't have to pay her, because while she was retained to observe my interest, which I still didn't fully buy, she was being paid for the service by the Federated Sons. It wasn't like I could object, because they were paying for everything ever since we arrived anyway. Nevertheless, it felt delightful to possess my own money, no matter the source. Damn it, the source did matter, I thought in vexation. We rode for about an hour to a different building, Hayes in tow. She tried to make small talk, caring not that I was being pointedly antisocial while trying more or less futilely to straighten up my head. I knew for a fact that right now I was more of a mess than when we initially arrived on New Avalon, and I was certainly not a pretty picture then. If it wasn't for Mia, I wouldn't know how I would have held on. This time around, I had no idea what building we ended up in. We got there through a long tunnel, with more than a few twists and turns. We got out in the 3rd underground garage for the day, this time complete with armed and armored guards, so a more secure facility then. I observed the soldiers, a man and a woman in Fed Sons colors, paying close attention to their equipment. It looked both familiar and odd at the same time. We passed through a couple of checkpoints until we ended up in a pleasant living room ex-spy. There was an open metal case on a table in the corner, its contents primary data chips laying around. I wondered how much of my inheritance was gone, deemed too important for my eyes. While I was staring at the case, not sure if I wanted to approach it and see for myself what Father sent, the second door leading into the room opened, admitting a pair of stout troopers, followed by a man who everyone who spent any time on New Avalon would recognize. That included a willing recluse like me. "First Prince!" I exclaimed, not squeaked in surprise, merely exclaimed, and fell on one knee as it was the fashion back in the Capellan Confederation. This was surreal and potentially remarkably bad for me. I just didn't know how or why. "Do stand up, please, Miss Lang," the First Prince announced, even as calls of "Your Highness" echoed in my ears. I wearily got up, carefully not meeting his eyes. You didn't look a member of a great house in the eyes, much less the leader, or so Father, hammered in my head for years. I was pretty sure Hans Davion was examining me critically and was as even sure I didn't pass muster. "Damn, I saw the pictures and recording, but this—" the First Prince muttered before he caught himself up. "Miss Lang, Mrs. Hayes, please do take a seat. We have a lot to discuss." The First Prince's suggestion was anything but. Naturally, I didn't hurry to a seat. It would be considered a great offense if I did it before he sat. I could feel his eyes boring into me. What he said next, however, came as a surprise. "Miss Ling, if I wasn't certain your father was dead, I would be sending the rabid foxes to make sure he would be," Davian said with sight. I perceived a sharp motion from the corner of my eyes that might have been a headshake. The first prince sat on a nearby chair, and only then did I allow myself to sit on the edge of the nearest one. Still, I carefully kept my eyes focused on the ground. I could feel my supposed lawyer staring at me as well. Exiles. Part 3. Exiles. Delcatar. 1st January 3015, Avalon City, New Avalon Federated Suns. I awoke with a pounding headache to the terribly familiar cacophony of arguing siblings. My mouth tasted as if something died inside, and I was reasonably sure I was a single child, even if I knew very well that I had 4 brothers and sisters to look after ever since Mum died. I stood up with a groan, my head spinning like a damaged gyroscope, and cracked my bleary eyes. Yep, I could recognize the small, relatively cramped apartment I grew up with. I also knew I grew up in a house back on Earth, not Terra. The fuck? The familiar arguing grew in volume, which did wonders for my headache. I could recall going out with a few of my fellow cadets last night for a handful of drinks. After that, I returned home just in time to meet the new year with my siblings. As importantly, it was to make sure they weren't up to no good in the few hours I left them without supervision. It wasn't like they weren't accustomed to my presence being minimal ever since April when I got admitted to one of the military universities in New Avalon, something I achieved after busting my ass for years to get a chance for us to get a better life. The unique problem with that story was the fact that, as far as I was aware, New Avalon was a fictional place. I knew I never attended a military academy, even though all my memories since April tended to disagree with that conclusion. Fuck my life, things like these were supposed to be fiction, the kind I've been writing for years now for fun and to chill out. This wasn't supposed to something that actually happened to poor bastards, much less me. I pinched my arm just in case, which hurt, and pointed at this not being a dream. God damn it. The arguing intensified. I got off the couch and hit the bathroom to get myself properly awake while trying to get a hang on my conflicting memories. A few minutes later, I felt better, though I was still trying to wrap my head around my current situation. Nevertheless, duty called, and I went out of the bathroom and walked into the kitchen. There, I found 2 of my siblings all but screamed at each other, while my youngest sister stared at them with huge eyes, which were already tearing up. "Jean, may I have a word with your brother and sister in private?" I went on one knee and roughed the blonde curls of my youngest sister, all the while delivering a pointed look to my 2 oldest siblings. For once, they had the good grace to shut up, even if they kept glaring at each other. Jean nodded rapidly and ran out of the kitchen. "Is someone going to explain to me what is this racket about, and why you 2 almost made our sister cry by being inconsiderate, thick-headed pains in the ass?" I asked in exasperation. Anna and Stephen used to be such nice kids, too. Then they became teenagers and, well, constant pain in the ass. It said something about my situation, that getting drilled into the ground while several instructors did their best to pound all the military knowledge of the Federated Suns into my head was almost a vacation, compared to being home and dealing with this all the bloody time. 2 sullen pairs of eyes looked back at me, then both of them began speaking in tandem, explaining at length how awful and inconsiderate the other was. While I did love my siblings, this I most definitely didn't miss. I dreaded the day when Mike and Jean would develop a chip on their shoulders too, especially if they would be anything like their older brother and sister. Speaking about Mike, he was at the corner of the table munching a sandwich and nodding his head in tandem with whatever music he was listening to, probably turned up to 11. He had bulky, old-fashioned headphones on his head and blithely paid no attention to the ongoing circus, which said a lot about his older brother and sister, who were supposed to set up an example and look after him and Jeannie, along with the social worker assigned to our particular case. Situations like these made me wish to graduate early and find myself deployed somewhere far away from New Avalon. At the same time, I dreaded what those four might do if I wasn't around for an extended period. Yes, I understand. Both of you are awful. Now that we have this squared, can you try to behave yourselves just a little bit? I'm not asking for too much, right? Anna and Stephen looked at each other and simultaneously shook their heads in the negative, then glared at each other for agreeing on anything. I wasn't that bad a few years ago, was it? Neither in this nor in the previous life I could now remember. Frankly, what I was going to do with those two, I had no bloody idea. My dubious salvation came in the form of the doorbell ringing, which I went to check while trying to gather my thoughts and figure out how to handle this. My previous life was no help in that regard. No experience with siblings. Something I used to regret. Well, now I had decidedly mixed feelings on the subject. Cadet Vale? A staff sergeant in field uniform stood on my doorstep looking critically at me. Yes, Staff Sergeant, I'm Cadet Delcatar Vale. You need to come with me, sir. He handed me a sealed envelope holding marching orders to assist in any way I could with an inquiry, from the Academy's commandant no less. What the fuck? I'll be coming in a moment, Staff Sergeant. If that's all right with you, I just need to ensure my siblings don't burn the building or try to kill each other while I'm away. As if to underline my point, Anna and Stephen were already at each other's throats again, and I was sure the whole building could hear them. The senior NCO snorted at that. I winced and went back to the kitchen to explain that duty called. All the while, I was wondering what additional mess I just landed myself in. The news that I would be leaving much earlier than expected didn't go down particularly well. It earned me 3 glares and waterworks from Jeannie, who didn't want to let me go. A not particularly long drive later saw me sitting in a secure room at MIIO's public headquarters. Which rumor had it dealt with the more mundane parts of their job? A nondescript man entered, and when the door closed, he sat across the small table from me, examining me carefully. May I inquire what's the purpose of this exercise, sir? I inquired warily. Coincidences happen all the time, Cadet, the man began. Every so often they are very useful. However, people in my business can never afford to believe in them. And that told me nothing. The man frowned, then asked a question that had me staring in shock at him. How is the weather in Strana Mechti, Cadet? He asked, then raised both eyebrows at my reaction. This isn't a waste of time then. We do need to talk, Cadet. Obviously. I nodded numbly while my mind came to a screeching halt. What the fuck? Really, what just happened? How did a MIO agent know to ask such a question? How did he know to ask me of all people? Because until just a couple of hours ago, I was just a normal cadet who had his hands full with his siblings? Exiles. Delilah. I feel the need to apologize, Ms. Lang. Hansa Davion began, sending my mind for a spin. My lord? I asked warily. You should be aware by now, he might have glanced at Lisa. The way we're handling your inheritance isn't exactly regular, even if the legal and security situations might allow my government get away with it. I was getting absolutely screwed. That much was obvious and expected. The first prince acting all apologetic? My mind was trying and failing to compute it. That wasn't what members of great houses did, much less their leaders. At this point, I do know a lot more about your inheritance than you know, Ms. Lang, which for obvious reasons is absolutely not all right. The first prince sighed. On top of that, it is not right at all that I'll be making you an offer you couldn't possibly refuse. It's how things are done, my lord, I muttered under my breath. And that is very much wrong. However, as the first prince of the Federated Sons, too often what is right and what I have to do for the betterment of my nation does not coincide. I'll speak bluntly, Miss Lang. Davion continued. Your father somehow got his hands on a battalion's worth of equipment, and if the content of this case is genuine, they include a number of units of Royal SLDF standard. I retained the vague recollection that what he said was very important. However, in the state of mind I was then and there, well, the relevant details eluded me. Furthermore, what could I do? So I merely nodded mutely. I could feel many eyes boring into me, and I had the first prince sight. I see that meeting you here and now was a mistake, Ms. Lang. He spoke gently. Nevertheless, I feel compelled to do the best I could with and we've been dealt. My government will be buying the majority of your inheritance at a fair market price. The first prince continued. However, we'll consider the precise details after your monolith arrives and its inspection is complete. I'll find the time to meet with you again later, Ms. Ling. I'll give you the time you need to go over the contents of the case, your father left you, and the various details of your inheritance. Please do think about what part of it you would like to retain and what you might do with it. There is some room to negotiate. I nodded again. I could hear his words, and while I understood them, I could sincerely say I didn't comprehend what he was attempting to tell me. For what little it is worth, I'm sorry for what has been done to you, Ms. Ling. I'm also ashamed for the way the debriefing worsened your condition, even if what we learned from it might be invaluable if verified. I mutely nodded again. Exiles. Hansa Davion. It was rare for the first prince to hate, if not outright loathe anything, as much as the Draconis Combine after they did to his realm and family. However, House Liao and the Capellan Federation as a whole came a very close second, especially on days like this one. Hansa Davion was accustomed to uncomfortable conversations. However, this one was particularly bad. It was little more than a one-sided monologue, which highlighted the fact that he had seldom spoken with anyone broken this much, and he was glad for it. After he had left the broken young woman behind, the first prince turned to one of his aides. See to it that Ms. Ling receives all the help she needs, both from Nace for her particular issues and the best therapy money could buy. Hansa took a deep breath and slowly exhaling to keep his temper under control. A few moments later, he was walking towards the garage surrounded by his bodyguards. What's the next thing on the agenda? Director Trustin is requesting a meeting with you as soon as possible, sir. Hansi raised an eyebrow at that. He could think about more than a few reasons why the director of MIIO would want to see him yesterday. Considering the circumstances, however, well, this new year just became even more unusual and surreal. Exiles. Part 4. Exiles. Delcatar. 1st January 3015. Avalon City. New Avalon Federated Sons. There was something very wrong, well beyond awakening with 2 sets of memories this morning. As far as I knew, no one in the inner sphere should know about the clans, about Strana Mekti, even if many people did suspect the Wolf Dragoons were descendants from Kerensky's exodus. A spook asking me that question. This morning? That was a mindfuck of the highest order, one that left my mind running in circles wondering what the hell was happening. Nevertheless, orders were orders, and thus I found myself bundled in a nondescript ground car speeding towards the royal palace, which raised even more questions. The spook who asked me the mind-bending question drove. There was another one riding shotgun, and neither of them was willing to answer questions. All kinds of fantastic scenarios ran through my mind, while at the same time I tried to make a head or tails of my new memories, which didn't paint a bright picture for the future. My best guess was the Wolf Dragoons did their job this time around and did warn the Federated Sons, perhaps others, about the clans. Or did they? I couldn't remember when they did receive orders to prepare the inner sphere. Thinking about it, I could recall all kinds of general knowledge, some of which wasn't particularly accurate as far as my memories, as someone who grew up on New Avalon, were concerned. This included all kinds of things that I couldn't possibly be aware of. We passed through multiple checkpoints until the car parked into a secluding parking lot where the spooks ushered me out and steered me into a room out of a Hollow movie. The place was lavishly decorated, and I was reasonably certain that most, if not all of the furniture, were centuries-old antiques. In fact, I was anxious to touch anything or get too close to the priceless antiques, because if I accidentally broke something, there was no way I could afford to pay for it. An unfamiliar man in his early 50s arrived while I was still busy warily examining the room. He wore a black suit that looked expensive enough that it almost physically pained me to think about how much easier such an amount of sea-bills would have made my life. Raising 4 siblings was anything but easy or cheap. "Cadet Vale, we have many things to discuss." "Sir?" I asked warily, focusing on the more pressing concerns, like how fucked I was and why. "I'm Director Trustin from the Ministry of Information, Intelligence, and Operations." At that, I stood so straight it felt like my spine was about to crack, reevaluating the amount of trouble I found myself in. This wasn't your regular amount of spook. This was the chief spook of the Federated Suns. Why the hell was he here giving me the light of day? Oh, I harbored the nagging suspicions. However, not a single one of them made much sense, unless I wasn't the only one with a second set of memories. Even then, how did they figure it out when I just awoke with them and hadn't done anything to raise suspicion? "I'm at your disposal, sir. Obviously." I spoke nervously. "What do you know about the so-called clans? How do you know it, and for how long?" Trustin went straight for the kill. I winced at the question, wondering if there was an answer I could provide that won't see me end either in a padded room or drowned in interrogation drugs. Scratch that. No matter what I said, I would be answering pointed questions for a long time to come. I was convinced of that. "Before I awoke this morning with a splitting headache, sir, I had no idea that the clans existed. I know they're the descendants from Kerensky's Exodus, that they're messed up society, and I believe they pose an extreme threat." I winced, or so my brand new second set of memories claim. I thought about lying, really did, and immediately discarded the idea as a particularly idiotic one. "Take a seat, Cadet Vale. We're in for a long debriefing." Trustin ordered and sat down on a nearby couch. I looked around and gingerly sat down as well, facing him. "What do you need to know, sir?" "I require collaboration for certain pieces of intelligence. First, Helm, what does it mean to you besides the obvious?" SLDF officer, Keller, I believe, concealed the site before the Kuritans arrived. While I can't recall where I remember something about an underground river. There should be an intact Star League library core there. I paused. "Go on." The director pushed for more. "The Grey Death Legion is eventually supposed to stumble upon it and suffer crippling losses while recovering it, though I can't recall any details." "New Dallas?" "Another Star League library. I have no idea about its location and contents." Trustin nodded sharply. "Wolf Dragoons?" "Allegedly scouting party for the clans. Their composition and actions make little sense in that regard. Multiple smaller outfits would blend in much better. They might receive orders to prepare the inner sphere for the return of the clans, though if that happens, they might not follow through, or they might be doing their best as scouts and to cause as much damage before their friends decide to come to ruin everyone's day. It could go either way. If I may be so bold, sir, how do you know? As I said, I just awoke with a new set of memories, and almost immediately I got whisked away for this conversation. "The truth, Cadet? We didn't. Your name came up within another investigation. The question that shocked you was a shot in the dark, which hit bullseye. As you might have guessed, you're now slatted for a friendly debriefing with memory enhancers." The possibility crossed my mind, though I can't say I'm looking forward to it. I grimaced. "Well, after the debriefing, we'll see where we'll do with you." Trustin critically looked at me. "If you come out clean, which I suspect, I'm reasonably sure we'll brief you on how exactly we stumbled upon you, Cadet. Do you recall anything of critical importance that we need to know?" I thought about it. What was about to happen wasn't going to be fun. However, it was inevitable. Besides, it was my duty, both as a Federated Sun citizen and soldier in training. I'm unsure about the timing, however. There might be a Capellan plot to replace the first prince with a doppelganger. One that, according to my memories, almost succeeds, however. I can't remember when it was supposed to happen. Trustin stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Up! He snapped and practically jumped out of his seat. You're undergoing enhanced debriefing now, Cadet Vale. Yes, sir. This was going to suck donkey balls. Exiles. Hansi Davion. Hansa stood alone in his office, grasping an untouched glass of whiskey. He stared at the last memento he had from Dana. All he could think about at that moment was why this couldn't have happened just over a year ago. In a few days, it would be the anniversary of Dana's murder. A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. He could also wish for this dubious miracle to have happened even earlier, before Yorinaga Kurita murdered Ian. It was selfish of him. Hans knew, but couldn't help it. The wound was still new and raw. People told him time would help. It was almost a year now, and Hans was sure that those were worthless platitudes, even if the people who kept telling him so actually meant it. He kept looking at the statue, made of a single piece of glass retrieved from Dana's cockpit. It had the engagement ring he gave her in its base, something no one knew. Hans put it there with his own hands. Yet Cadet Vale has known of it. He didn't recognize how the statue looked, couldn't even describe it. Yet when asked for possible proof of his new set of memories after the drugs took effect, that was what he spoke of. A statue on Hans's desk. It's the origin and what it held. The following question was about that insane doppelganger plot the cadet mentioned. While the young man couldn't recall many details, even under the influence of memory enhancers, what he could tell was enough to infuriate Hansi even more as far as the damned Capellans were concerned. Everyone knew that House Leo produced insane rulers as often as not, sometimes brilliantly insane but still insane. That plot? It sounded just crazy enough for something the Liaos might concoct. Hell, if anyone needed proof that the insane ran the asylum over there, what they did to Ms. Leng, what her father did to her in the name of the Chancellor and science. Hans carefully put down the glass before it could shatter in his hand, which shook with fury. He wasn't thinking particularly straight right now. He knew that for a fact. Throwing everything he had at the Capellans to rid the universe of them sounded like the best idea he had in a long while, even if it was, unfortunately, unfeasible, both due to logistics and the threat the Combine always represented. The first thing he had to do right now was waiting, then go over the complete debriefing of Cadet Vale, then figure out how much of the information could be verified and how much would be actionable any time soon, if ever. He had to figure out what to do with both the cadet and Ms. Leng, what they were as well. Perhaps Dr. Banzai's theory voiced in jest might be true. Reincarnation made as much sense as anything else. As if that wasn't enough, there was the coincidence linking those two. It wasn't just the memories, but the fact that both of them were slatted to receive inheritance on their birthday. Another thing they shared. Both Cadet Vale and Ms. Leng became 20 today, and both of them were about to receive a lot of military hardware from their dead fathers, roughly a battalion each. That by itself stretched credibility, however. The inner sphere was big. Coincidences happened every day. Yet this much of a coincidence as far as those two were concerned, it stretched credibility. That was one of the reasons Amio was on it, looking for other such odd coincidences, both within the Federated Suns and abroad. If two people got just reincarnated with memories they shouldn't possess, who was to say there wouldn't be others, no matter how crazy it sounded? Second chapter, 2, parts 1 and 2. Chapter 2, Exiles, Part 1. Exiles. Hansa Davion, 2nd January 3015. Avalon City, New Avalon, Federated Sun. At 6 in the morning, Hansa Davion sat behind his desk, nursing a cup of steaming strong coffee, fit to awake the dead. His guests, who were among his closest advisors and confidants, did the same, and 2 of them looked like they might do with a few spare hours of sleep. For Director Trustin was probably high time he got some shut-eye before he became exhausted enough to begin making mistakes, or had to take stimulants. In contrast, Yvonne looked fresh and crisp, as if she enjoyed a full night's sleep. Hans's principal military advisor and old mentor, Ran Felsner, looked ready for a parade, too, even if he wore the field uniform he deemed more comfortable for day-to-day business. "Have you all seen the cliff notes of Cadet Vale's debriefing?" Hans asked, and took a sip of scalding coffee. Yvonne and Ran nodded, while Trustin kept scowling at the contents of a folder he had open in his lap. "Director, summarize what we know for a fact, what we suspect, and what might prove to be actionable intelligence in the short to medium term," Hansa suggested. He had his own ideas on the subject. However, he wanted to first see what his advisors thought about the situation. "For a fact," Trustin repeated, and closed shut the folder he held. "Very little beyond the fact that Ms. Leng and Cadet Vale possess access to information they should not know. There are points of corroboration between their debriefings and at least one piece of evidence to support their stories." At that, Hans briefly glanced at the statue standing proudly on his desk, then forced himself away from any thoughts about Dana. It almost worked this time. Meanwhile, Yvonne looked speculatively between Hans and the statue, though she thankfully decided not to comment. Nevertheless, the brief look she sent him afterward promised that they would have a talk when time permitted. While the intelligence they provided is largely unconfirmed, it offered us several leads to investigate. Further, early this morning, we received a message from an agent in the Oregon Reach. High Lord Tamati Arano and his wife were killed during a large-scale pirate raid. Santiago Espinosa, the High Lord's brother-in-law, has taken control of the Oregon Coalition and proclaimed its transformation in Oregon Directorate. Simultaneously, he has assumed the role of regent to his niece, Kamea Arano. There was no mention of such an event in Cadet Vale's debriefing, Hans pointed out. "Yes, sire. He did mention a potential coup led by Espinosa, which should be at least a decade in the future, along with the creation of this directorate." Trustin continued. "However, he was right on the money about a directorate being formed over there, who leads it as well. However, the timing is decidedly off, which means that at best everything else he could tell us is suspect and to be taken with a cup of salt. The same goes for Miss Leng." "Well, they were both on the money for our potential long-term plans, even though the thought about marrying Katrina Steiner's daughter has never crossed my mind. She's how old now? 4, 5? She should be 5 this June, I think," Yvonne smirked. "And you aren't exactly a spring chicken now. I'll appreciate it if you keep cradle robbing to the minimum, Hans. The debriefings sound like a clever piece of fiction," she smirked. "Don't remind me. Speaking with Ms. Leng yesterday," Hans grimaced. It was like stealing sweets from a toddler. "The last thing I needed afterward was this idea put in my head." He shuddered. "What do you intend doing about Ms. Leng and her inheritance?" Ran inquired, dutifully steering the topic to a bit safer topic. "Honestly, I'm unsure what I must do. The best thing to do for the Federated Sons is almost obvious, not quite. What's the right thing to do?" Hansi shook his head. "Legally, there is a precedent for seizing critically important hardware, and it's usually all right, provided we offer proper compensation," Trustin pointed out. "We're still paying for seized jump ships and drop ships during the Second Secession War, and will continue to do so at least until the mid-20s. Hansa grimaced. That was a piece of trivia that stuck with him from the endless series of briefings that came with becoming the first prince. There's the political consequences of not being careful as well. This girl is a golden trove as far as propaganda goes, both internally and externally, Yvonne noted. If we handle this just right, Ms. Leng could be the poster child proving we take care of defectors and exiles who seek our protection. And enhancing such a reputation might make my people's lives a bit easier as well, Trustin added. I'm not going to rob her blind, Hans protested. I know you won't, Hans. I'm merely pointing out that this situation might require even lighter touch than you might have believed. At any rate, proper negotiations will have to wait until that monolith is supposed to arrive, and it could be inspected properly. Considering where it comes from, I believe it should be performed with a fine-tooth comb, as they say, Ran added. Even if the inheritance is genuine, there might be the odd Maskurovka-sourced gift delivered along. Duly noted. Hansa nodded. We're going off topic, the debriefings. You all should grasp the most crucial points. The Liao's trying to replace you with a doppelganger, sire, something Cadet Vale couldn't recall many details off, despite being pumped with memory enhancers. Yes, that, Yvonne snapped. Something like that coming anywhere close to success would mean an unacceptable intelligence and security failure. Even if we had more to work with, like vague dates, Trustin continued, we can't necessarily rely on them after this morning. He tapped the folder in his lap. Hans was reasonably sure it contained a report about the events in the Oregon Reach. The coup within the Oregon Coalition is concerning for another reason. Cadet Vale believes that High Lord Arano either had or would gain access to the coordinates of a crashed Star League dropship. In turn, the computers in the said ship would contain leads towards an SLDF Castle Bryan, which might contain a library core. And that was the third one either Ms. Ling or Cadet Vale were potentially aware of. Helm, New Dallas, somewhere in the Oregon Reach. Each of those was myths at best, yet even a long shot at recovering one would be a priceless opportunity. Location which could be in the hands of the newly formed Oregon Directorate. The good news, if true, is that Cadet Vale did recall the potential location of the dropship, a moon Exiles. A bit of digging into Star League-era records, we have led me to believe it's a moon within the Alloway system in the Oregon Reach, Trustin explained. The bad news is that even if we send a team there today, it won't reach the location before the Directorate could if they're aware of the potential importance of the system. At any rate, I do recommend if we at least send an agent to check up the area. If there is a crashed experimental dropship there, it will enhance the credibility of the information we're discussing. I concur. Even if a long shot, the possibility of gaining access to a library core, Rand trailed off. That was the Atlas in the room. Such a discovery could secure the future of the Federated Suns, or at least ensure they had a future if the debriefings were anywhere close to being right about Kerensky's descendants. It's the reason Dana died, the reason he authorized the raid there. Because if they had managed to recover the library intact, it would have been worth it, even if his bile raised the thought that anything might have been worth losing Dana. Director, I want MIIO to quietly go over everything we know about Helm, even discredited rumors. Everything. The same goes for New Dallas. Even thinking about a raid at either location without a concrete target and a plan is out of the question, of course. Especially as far as New Dallas was concerned. On the other hand, the newest free world civil war visited Helm feasible. However, without a decent idea of where to search and what for, it would be a waste of time. It wasn't like countless treasure hunters, not to mention the Free Words League military, had been all over the place. If there was indeed a hidden cache there, the odds of merely stumbling upon it were remote. Despite that, as far as Cadet Vale was concerned, the Grey Death Legion would have stumbled upon it anyway in the fascinated future he recalled. What about the Oregon Reach? Ran asked. About that. Hansa smiled crookedly. Exiles. Part 2. Exiles. Del Qatar, 2nd January 3015, Avalon City, New Avalon, Federated Sun. The second time I awoke, it was to a headache, too. My mouth felt like something died inside, and as if that wasn't enough, I had trouble figuring out who I was. The issue wasn't that I had amnesia or holes in my memory. On the contrary, there were way too many memories racing through my mind as soon as awareness returned to me, and all of them felt genuinely fresh and real. I could recall going back to bed, back on Earth, enjoying a few days of medical leave. I could also recall going to bed in my apartment in New Avalon. It happened after I had returned to celebrate the new year my siblings. Afterwards, tucked Joanne to bed and went to sleep. I could also remember the orders to cooperate and the question that came to me from a left field. I still had no idea how MIO knew to ask it. No one I met afterward knew or was willing to spill the beans. I could vividly remember the debriefing that followed, complete with all the drugs, a combination of actually working truth serum and memory enhancers. That was fun. "Ah, you're awake, Cadet. Just in time, too." At those words, my eyes snapped open and wildly looked around. The room was a familiar one, the same one where I had the debriefing and passed out due to the drugs at its tail end. That I didn't recall. The voice belonged to a nurse, who was large, fit, very male, and thankfully not scantily clad. While I was in decent shape, in this life anyway, the time at the academy made me feel decidedly jealous, as far as many of my peers were concerned. I didn't know if it was a legacy from Star League era, genetic engineering, better food and the opportunity to take better care of themselves, or good old-fashioned luck. However, the moment we hit the showers, I often felt very much inadequate. It didn't help that even if I busted my ass in the academy, my grades were mostly average as well. Oh, I was in no danger of failing. However, I was nowhere near the best of my peers. And thanks to my rioting memories, such pieces of unimportant trivia seemed as important and fresh in my mind as the key facts, like my location and the reason why I was in bed, with all kinds of medical sensors stuck to my chest, arms, and temples. Ultimately, I managed to focus enough to croak at the nurse, who nodded with an understanding smile and offered me a cup of water, complete with a straw. Going down from all these drugs is a rough ride, or so they tell me. Focus on my voice, Cadet, then try to focus on a single thought instead of allowing your mind to wander. The nurse continued in a well-practiced manner. He knew what he was talking about because 15 minutes and a stimulant pill later, I was well enough to visit a private bathroom nearby. When I got out after a quick cold shower, I found out that there were fatigues in my size waiting for me, along with a set of clean underwear. I got myself dried up and clothed, at which point the nurse appeared with a tray of food and a steaming cup of tea. There would be no coffee or worse, alcohol for me at least for the next 2 or 3 days if I recognized what was good for me. With a warm meal in my belly, I finally felt more or less alive. As a bonus, my memories were more or less under control, even if I still couldn't figure out which set felt more real, so to speak. They were both equally tangible, which was a mind twister in itself. For good or ill, no one left me to stew on my situation. The nurse came back almost as soon as I was done eating, collected the tray, and left again, this time with the promise that someone would be around to collect me shortly. He was right too, though he understated it. A few seconds after the door closed behind him, someone knocked and a sergeant in the Davion Guard's colors appeared on the doorstep. "Cadet Vale, please follow me." The veteran NCO, who appeared to be in his early 50s, ordered in a neutral tone. He didn't wait for me to react, instead turned in place and marched out. I scrambled to follow, falling a step behind the rapidly walking sergeant. To begin with, he steered me to a nearby security post where the guards had the few personal belongings I had on me when I left home. Was it yesterday? Anyway, they had those items, along with my ID, which I picked up, and we continued moving through the corridors of the palace. 30 minutes later, we passed through multiple security checkpoints, rode 2 elevators too, and finally arrived high up into the complex. The sergeant ushered me through much busier, not to mention richly decorated corridors until we reached an ornate wooden door. He nodded at the pair of guards stationed there, and one called forward, announcing my arrival. At that point, we waited until whoever I was about to meet had time to give the light of day to an odd cadet like me. The trip and waiting offered me more than enough time to become nervous considering the situation. Who knew what the powers that be would do with me? How did they know about me before even I knew about myself, if that made any sense? How much of what I recalled now was true, and if it was, how much of a mess my debriefing was going to cause? How would these developments affect my brothers and sisters? One of the guards nodded at us, interrupting my musings, and opened the door and waved me inside. I nodded stiffly and walked in as if I was going to my funeral. As soon as I passed the threshold and recognized the older woman glowering at a terminal on her desk, I did my best to march like on a parade, with all the brass looking at me. Which wasn't far from the truth. Who didn't know Yvonne Davion, the first Prince's champion? "Ma'am, Cadet Delcatar Vale, reporting for duty," I stated and saluted as soon as I reached what I deemed a respectable distance from her desk. "At ease, Cadet." She barked like a grizzled drill instructor, making me jump before I warily stood down to parade rest. Was that amusement sparkling in her eyes? As I said, "At ease, take a seat," the Prince's champion said, now speaking in a considerably different tone. "I don't bite, neither do I eat cadets and junior officers for breakfast." Was she trolling me? Really? I gave her a flat look, something I wouldn't have even thought about before awakening after New Year Eve, and did gingerly sit down. "Good. There's a bit of spine to you, Cadet. You're likely going to need it soon." "I will. I already didn't like where this was going." "As you might have guessed," Lady Davian began, "your debriefing caused a stir." She smirked. "It's always good to see our MIIO friends run around trying to put down the latest fire." "If it isn't too presumptuous to ask, ma'am, how and why?" As soon as I blurted out the question, I wanted the floor to rise and swallow me. The Prince's champion looked at me curiously before she responded. "It was as much luck as anything else, if my I.O. is to be believed. Your name came up as a red flag, and well, someone decided to throw a wide net and see what they might catch. You got very lucky or unfortunate, depending on how you see it, Cadet." "What's the weather on Strain-Amecti?" I asked, and while I spoke, a hint of a Slavic accent entered my voice. An accent I shouldn't have. As a boy born and raised on New Avalon, one who had no significant interaction from people speaking Russian or any similar language. Yes, I understand that whoever had that particular brainstorm might have overstepped their bounds. However, it worked, so there's that. By her tone and bearing, I was reasonably sure Lady Davion was enjoying needling me for some reason. "Now, on a more solemn note, Cadet, we, as in the Federated Sons government, have a few orders and requests for you." "I'm at your disposal, ma'am." Because really, what else could I say? When all was said and done, new memories or not, I was nevertheless a Federated Sons citizen and patriot. Right? "Good. That's excellent, Cadet Vale. First, before you're free to leave, we'll require you to meet someone, but that's for later. Second, needless to say, everything that we discovered during your debriefing is classified Sword 2. I possess a few documents for you to sign to that effect. This includes everything you recall from what might have been a previous life." Lady Davion pursed her lips into a slight frown at that. "Reincarnation?" I asked. True. That sounded like a reasonable conclusion. Or it would be if my new memories didn't come from a different world. Still, it could be. It wasn't like I had died before and remembered, so I couldn't either prove or disprove such a conclusion. Not insanity? There are indications that what you recall isn't merely a hallucination or madness. At any rate, a doctor did undergo a scan of your brain, and you might be delighted to know it's a normal brain for someone your age. Well, almost normal, your memory centers are all lit up, but that is to be expected under the circumstances. Lady Davian forged on. "That's good to know, ma'am." Or was it? "Next, I believe that both condolences and congratulations are in order." I merely looked questioningly at the Prince's champion. Your father recently died," Lady Davian explained. I didn't feel anything because not only I had never met the man in this life anyway, I had no idea who he was. "I never knew the man, ma'am. The sentiment is appreciated anyway." I waited for the other shoe to drop. "He left you and your siblings an inheritance, a substantial one at that, which under the present circumstances was one of the reasons you were asked that question, Cadet." "I see. No, ma'am, I don't." "Unfortunately, at this moment, you aren't clear for all the details. Later today, you might be, in which case I'll have someone brief you. In your shoes, I would want to know what the hell is happening too," Lady Davian said gently, "but we digress. You'll have to contact your father's lawyers soon, and it is your inheritance where our request comes in. We're pretty sure he has left you both a substantial sum, more than enough to see you and your siblings live the rest of your lives in comfort, and more importantly, a significant amount of military hardware." My eyebrows tried to jump to the ceiling at that. Mum was serious then. Father was a noble, wasn't he? I winced, thinking how I reacted the last time she mentioned the possibility before she died. "And you didn't believe it, did you?" I merely shook my head. That wasn't one of my finest moments in either life by a long shot. Lady Davian looked at me in contemplation. "Now we're treading on a legal minefield, Cadet Vale. By all rights, what comes next should be happening only after you've received your inheritance, and preferably after you've had time to get accustomed to what happened as of late. However, considering your particular status, that might not be the best call." "Then why this?" I waved a hand between us. This conversation so far told me little of substance. "I believe myself a fair judge of character, Cadet Vale. While your debriefing confirms that you're a loyal Federated Suns citizen, it told us little about who you are." "And how do you judge me, ma'am?" I dared to ask. "You're very green as expected. Someone will have their hands full to make you not stand out in court. On the other hand, these are useful qualities as far as Hansi's latest scheme is concerned." "The First Prince has plans concerning me?" I asked warily, while dreadful chills ran up my spine. Whatever that was, it would be a great way to get myself killed. I just knew it. "Oh, I'm sure he does. Sometimes that boy is too clever for his good," Lady Davian grumbled good-naturedly. "First things first, you have a meeting to attend. Then you better go see your siblings and your father's lawyers. Afterward, well, we'll see if Hans's newest plot will pan out." That was as clear a dismissal as I would get. Lady Davian returned her attention to her terminal, and I got up, saluted, and left. The sergeant waited for me outside, and it was time for another trip through the labyrinth-like corridors of the palace. Eventually, we reached what was a residential area, and the NCO led me to a large door guarded by a pair of fully kitted-out troopers. Their presence didn't help my state of mind because I've been running all kinds of strange and crazy options through my head ever since my meeting with the Prince's champion ended. They let me inside and fell right behind me. I could feel their eyes boring into my neck as I walked through a long corridor, which was both richly decorated yet radiated homely feeling. We got to an ornate door made of white wood, and I glanced at my shadows, who simply nodded. I shrugged and knocked. "Yes, come in," a far-off voice proclaimed. I performed as ordered and found myself in a living room way vaster than my whole apartment. My eyes glanced over the furniture, all old, tasteful, and ruinously expensive. There were all kinds of portraits on the walls, which in turn had dark wood paneling. This was the kind of place I thought I would never see outside a hollow screen. Before long, my eyes found the two occupants of the room, a young woman who was busy brushing the short hair of a girl who was about Jean's age. Their features were a soft mix of an Asian and Caucasian, though that was merely an afterthought. I could see deep scars marring the face of the young woman, which caused something in my head to click. I've seen her before, and I was sure of it. There was a stir on the news not so long ago about a defector or a refugee from the Capellan Confederation. That's who she was. which begged the question, why was I here? "Vale," she muttered and went pale like a ghost. Yes, miss?" "I'm Cadet Delcatar Vale. Have we met before?" I looked at her in question. I was certain I would remember, especially with the memory enhancers still running through my system. She merely clutched the little girl in a death grip and jerked her head, staring at me with dilated eyes. "You can't be here. You can't be real." She kept muttering while I looked at her, lost for words. This was a bloody mistake. One of the guards behind me muttered, "You better leave now, sir." "Yes, I'll go." I nodded and turned to leave, wondering what the hell just happened. A tall, red-haired woman came hurrying from a side door and went to sit beside the frantic girl. I gave them one last look and followed the guard's instructions. Could this day get any weirder? Third chapter. 2. Parts 3 and 4. Chapter 2. Exiles. Part 3. Exiles. Delilah. 2nd January 3015. Avalon City, New Avalon Federated Sun. Delilah held to her little sister for dear life, while her mind played games with her. It wasn't bad enough that she was even more of a glorified prisoner now than she was before. Now she saw things that couldn't be there too. Why couldn't the world be done with her and leave her alone? Was that too much to ask for? This was a spectacularly bad idea, Mr. Smith grumbled grumpily. "You don't say," Jane snipped back. "Hey there, Delilah. It's all right. I know it's a shock and not what you needed." The redhead sighed. "Some people are too clever for anyone's good." She shook her head. Delilah looked up from Mia numbly, while her little sister squirmed in her hands and turned stared at her with enormous, bewildered eyes. "I'm seeing things now," Delilah mumbled. You aren't seeing things unless there's something you aren't telling us." Jane trailed off. Delilah frowned at her minder. "I just saw a man who should be dead or not even exist in the first place walk through that door right there." She pointed a trembling hand at the offending door. "That was a certain Cadet Vale, like he said. His name popped up in search after your debriefing. Afterward, our people apparently picked him up and he got debriefed too. Who thought it was a brilliant idea to ensure you two met here and now without a warning? I have no darn idea." Jane patiently explained. "He's real." "Like a heart attack," Smith grumbled from his position beside the offending door. "I have no idea what's happening anymore," Delilah decided. "There's a lot of that going on lately," Jane confided with a wan, amused smile. "Because of you," remained unsaid, however, Delilah heard it loud and clear. Exiles. Delcatar. After the odd meeting with the Capellan exile, I faced another brief interrogation. It was with one of the MIIO agents who conducted my debriefing. He asked me a bunch of questions about her. Did I know her name? Had I seen or met her before? The works. I answered truthfully, and soon thereafter found myself escorted out of the palace. There was one brief interruption, an offer for a government-supplied lawyer to advise me when I met my father's layers, one which I accepted promptly. It wasn't like I could afford to hire a competent layer anyway. After that, I got an escort and a driver, who transported me to an MIIO safe house, where I found my siblings. An unsettled Jean thews herself at me, waterworks going on at full power, while a very much not amused Anna glared daggers at me for disrupting her social life. At least my brothers were peachy. I found them watching the most recent installment of The Immortal Warrior on a huge TV in the living room. It took me some time and a bribe in the form of chocolate from a well-loaded fridge to get Jean to calm down. Mike and Steven found the whole thing cool as hell, as they put it, especially if it could keep them out of school for as long as possible. Anna, on the other hand, confronted me as soon as I got Jean settled up for a nap. "What did you do, brother?" My sister glared at me. "I have friends. I have a life," she snapped. "Whatever I might have done or not done, I obviously can't talk about. What I can speak about is that this," I waved around, should be temporary until different arrangements can be done. What I can tell you is that this is connected with our father. He is apparently dead, left us some manner of inheritance. And as far as I know, there is some kind of political complication that warrants this. I'll be meeting with his lawyers later today to figure out the details. I didn't precisely lie. After the whole inheritance mess is settled, I would be enjoying another meeting with Lady Davian, and then we would be figuring how to proceed. Or, well, the powers that be will be deciding, with hopefully a bit of input from yours truly. What? Mum wasn't joking about that? Father was a knob? That's my understanding. I won't have details at least until sometime this evening. Anna, can you do me the favor of behaving until I could straighten this up? It will cost you, brother mine. Anna stared at me with her piercing green eyes. Blackmail already? Where did I go wrong? I shook my head, and it wasn't entirely into a mock outrage. Now, Anna had always been a handful to deal with. However, the older she got, the less she listened to anyone, at least since Mum died. Fine, I'll make it up to you, I grumbled. See to it that you do. My not-so-little sister nodded imperiously and marched out of the room. All the while, one of the guards protecting the place witnessed the show with a barely suppressed smirk. I had given him a venomous glare before I went in search for my clothes. A few minutes later, I was on the road again, wearing the best formal attire I had, an older suit I purchased for my graduation from high school, which still fit, even if barely. Exiles. I met the lawyers in their office, straight in the middle of a tall, needle-like skyscraper that gleamed like a needle piercing the skies. I must admit, the view was breathtaking, and if it was meant to awe visitors, it was widely successful as far as I was concerned. The office itself was all dark glass and gleaming metal, with the odd storage cabinet in the similar style. The chairs themselves were egg-shaped, colored just like everything else. To be frank, the place didn't give the best first impression, or depending on the kind of lawyers you wanted, just the one they wanted to show. Mr. Delcatar Vale, I'm Joshua Roberts. A smiling middle-aged man with clipped hair that swam in enough gel to be a fire hazard offered me his hand. He had a firm, no-nonsense handshake, no stupid contests of strength or other petty shenanigans. Do take a seat. We have a lot of business to discuss. I'm afraid we were unable to contact you yesterday as your late father's bequest required. He offered me an apologetic smile and even sounded properly contrite. I'm here now. My father? I asked curiously. Your father was the late Baron Nicholas Vonnegut. Mr. Roberts' words meant nothing to me. That was a name I was pretty sure I hadn't heard of before. Yet the man had sounded like he expected the name meant something to me. Perhaps a lot. It's good to have a name for the man who sired me for what it's worth, I spoke neutrally. Really, what was I supposed to feel right now? I had never met the man, and now he was dead. You aren't familiar with him? The lawyer inquired. My client didn't know the identity of his father. That much has been established, Mr. Roberts, my lawyer countered. He was a distinguished gentleman in his early 60s, or at least he gave that vibe. Wealthy, too, if his expensive suit and a few pieces of understated jewelry visible were anything to go by. Ever since I met him on the way to this meeting, I was convinced that he wasn't merely run-of-the-mill lawyer working for the government. That said, the name George Kenneth didn't tell me anything. Fair enough, Mr. Kenneth. Roberts acknowledged respectfully and turned my way. Mr. Vale, the first point of the agenda are trust funds established for your siblings. Each one of them will receive 250,000 C-bills held in trust. You can use up to half of the money on their education, and they will receive access to the rest when they turn 20. With those words, the lawyer pushed 4 stacks of documents our way. Fuck me sideways, that was one huge expense I wouldn't need to worry about. Paying for the education of my brothers and sister was a black hole that kept sucking funds like there was no tomorrow. Kenneth picked up the one on top and began examining it with a keen eye. Everything seems in order. However you understand, we'll have to go over everything before my client signs anything. We're compensated more than generously for executing Baron Vonnegut's will." Robert smiled politely. What followed was something that would repeat itself a lot that day. Kenneth would go over various stacks of documents, read through them, and then confirm that they were precisely what they appeared. Only then I would sign them up so we could continue. Next, it's the first part of Baron Vonnegut's inheritance that directly concerns you, Mr. Vale. The first item your father left you is in the form of liquid assets, consolidated into a single account as per his wishes. Accounted for taxes, you're to receive 140 million C-bills from the Baron's estate. Robert's professional mask cracked briefly, and he smirked at my gobsmacked expression. "That's nice," I managed to utter while my lawyer was busy going over the folder which Roberts handed him. While money can't solve all problems, C-bills tend to make one's life much easier in many respects, Roberts said. A signature later, and at least in theory, my financial woes were finally over. Hell, that was a goddamned relief. Now only if I didn't have a ton of brand new issues to worry about. Now, it's time for the more irregular part of your inheritance. Mr. Vale people receiving the odd mech or two from their ancestors are a very common thing, as you might now, Roberts began. Yeah, that was practically a meme and had been one for decades by now. In your case, Baron Vonnegut was a lot more generous. Roberts paused. Yes, that's a good way to put it. He nodded and opened a drawer on his desk, one protected by a biometric scanner. A beep later, he brought up a large metal folder of the kind used to carry confidential documents. It was sealed airtightly and required both a code and a thumb scan to open. I'm unsure how your father got his hands on everything he left to you. However, to the best of our knowledge, everything has been acquired above board. Roberts opened the container, revealing a stack of multiple smaller folders. To begin with, we have the jump ships. I choked on the tea our host's secretary offered us before we began. Jump ships? Like FTL-capable ships and more than one? I requested clarification because I couldn't have heard right. No wonder I found myself on my IO's radar. How the hell did my father got his hands on those, and why did he leave them to me? Why did he leave everything else to me, too? It wasn't like we ever saw or heard of him before. Yes, Mr. Vale, jump ships. Multiple jump ships. You're about to become the proud owner of an Invader and Scout. However, they aren't in pristine condition. The last evaluation, filled up by the crew of the Invader, claims that they'll need repair. About 12 million C-bills to put them back into satisfactory condition. Speaking about the crew, they're contracted to your father, and you have the option to maintain the contract if both parties agree, Roberts droned on. As far as I knew, the Invader was the most common class of jump ship in the inner sphere. That still meant that in this day and age, they were almost invaluable. It also meant they were the class that had the spare parts flying around and thus was relatively the cheapest to repair and maintain. The Scout, on the other hand, was a tiny ship. If I had my history right, was primarily meant as an explorer, or well, scout like the name outright stated. Due to its small size, Scouts were exclusively used by military or mercenaries. They could carry only a single dropship, which generally made them not viable commercially. In contrast, an Invader could carry 3, which more than paid for the expense of operating and maintaining them. My lawyer got the relevant folder and I got my mind on the ball, at least as much as I could. Now it was becoming painfully clear why I was on my IO's radar. The fact that my father, the Baron, had access to even 2 jump ships by itself would have put him in the government's sights. Jump ships were the lifeblood of the galaxy, and it has been centuries since anyone had even close to enough of them. I was almost afraid to ask what came next. Logically, it now turns to discuss the dropships you're inheriting, Mr. Vale. Roberts opened a second folder from the stack. I would be damned if he wasn't enjoying the heck out of this. You're receiving 4 of them, which fits with the jump ship configuration you'll own as soon as you sign the relevant documents. I can't wait to hear your next surprise, Mr. Roberts. I was surprised my voice didn't sound like Jean's when she was about to savage the wrapping of her Christmas present. Then I hope I won't disappoint. Robert's smile appeared positively genuine. First, and arguably the least, we have an Excalibur. Huge troop transport, which while quite useful had large drawbacks. One of the largest ones was that the primary source of critical spare parts, including the fusion engine, was within the Combine. I've heard people in the Academy's cafeteria bitching about those ships and the incredibly long time it took to unload the troops it carried. Up to 3 hours depending on composition and how well trained everyone was. Needless to say, that was an eternity, if there was even a hint of hostile presence in the area. A good old-fashioned mule is next, Robert stated. That was enough said, really. The mules were the most common merchant dropships and made for decent logistics vessels. This meant they were relatively cheap and easy to maintain due to the availability of spare parts. Just like the Invader, really. You'll be the proud owner of 2 more dropships, Mr. Vale. Roberts forged on as if he was a sales representative instead of an executor of a will. It was almost understandable, really. Considering I've never met or knew my late father, there was no need for the usual solemnity and gravitas that might accompany such procedures. The other obvious conclusion wasn't likely. Even if he was a complete ass under all that gel and expensive suit, it would be unprofessional of him to show it. You're also receiving a triumph and a vengeance, Mr. Vale. Triumph. Well, that one I knew. In fact, I flew in one en route to a hands-on exercise on the other side of the planet during my 3rd foray in a training mech. It was a beautiful machine, aerodynamic, fast, and sleek. It wasn't just a tough platform able to deploy troops in relative safety. It was easy and fast to deploy from them. They could also be modified as carriers for ASF, too. When all was said and done, a tremendously useful ship for any military worth their salt. Last but certainly not the least, it was the Vengeance. Its presence in the mix had been the largest single surprise so far. The Vengeance class was a dedicated carrier. In fact, the largest dedicated carrier anyone fielded since the fall of the Star League. It could carry up to 40 aerospace fighters. It was frequently compared to a flat, ugly brick someone mounted thrusters on. With a few notable exceptions, serving with the largest and most famous mercenary outfits, you couldn't find a Vengeance outside the hands of the military. This ship by itself would account for the Federated Sun's government being on my heels, wanting to offer me a deal I couldn't possibly refuse. I see you understand what those ships represent. Roberts nodded in what looked like an attempt to appear wise, but it didn't quite work with his gleaming hair. All dropships, with the notable exception of the Excalibur, are in good condition, requiring nothing more than standard maintenance. The Vengeance has a crew, and if both sides agree, they might continue to work for you if you decide to retain it. Repairing the Excalibur is estimated to cost about 6 million C-bills. By and large, the expense is because finding many of the needed parts outside the Combine, and to a lesser extent, Lyrian space, is hard. Obviously expensive too, or so the crews who examined the ships claimed. I wouldn't know, though. You might want to get a second opinion, Mr. Vale. Another folder went to my lawyer. Next comes the troublesome part. Roberts looked at me with a grave expression on his face. The money you inherited is safe in a bank account. The ships are all accounted for, and we know where they wait for you. The next part of your inheritance will need to be examined after you confirm you'll accept it. We know what you're supposed to receive, however, we'll need to confirm everything is, in fact, present. Otherwise, we'll have to figure out who to sue to hell and back. That isn't regular, Mr. Roberts. Kenneth spoke aloud for the first time since he began going through the documents. Until Mr. Vale confirms he'll be taking possession of the rest of his inheritance, we won't obtain access to check if what he is supposed to receive is in fact available. Part of the vehicles are supposed to be on the Vengeance and will be available for inspection after you agree to take ownership of both the ship and said hardware. Roberts explained. What hardware are we talking about? First, several battle mech. They should be stored in 3 factory warehouses and in fact be brand new. It was an excellent thing I hadn't touched my tea since the first incident because otherwise I would be spluttering all over the table. Multiple mechs, brand new. How did the Baron get his hands on them? When? Hell, right now I wouldn't be surprised if Hansa Davion himself enters and heads my way with grabby, covetous hands. You see, I harbored a sneaking suspicion. First the jump ships, then just enough drop ships to fit on their collars. Now a mention of multiple brand new mechs, which would be a treasure trove even if there were just bugs. If there was enough equipment to fill up those ships. Did Mio look at my father with a suspicion that he might be part of a suspected coup or something? We are talking about the hardware for a substantial force right here, by the military's standard. By our military standard, not that of some periphery hellhole. About the battle mechs, what we have available are type, number, and location. You'll have to visit along with a representative of our firm to assume custody of them, so we can ensure both that they're all there and in factory condition. You're set to receive 4 heavy mechs, 12 medium and 24 light. 40 brand new mechs? What? I was virtually certain that there we marches in the Federated Suns that didn't receive that many brand new battle mechs each year. As far as I knew officially, there were only a few hundred brand new battle mechs produced each year all across the inner sphere. Yet I was about to receive 40? Fuck me, no wonder my I.O. was all over my case. They found me by accident my ass. What the fuck was Father up to? Is that all? I croaked. From the corner of my eye, I could see Kenneth staring at Roberts with what might be a well-disguised shock as well. Yes, those numbers surprised us as well. Mr. Vale, I can assure you. We've done our best to ensure your inheritance is handled with the utmost confidentiality. Roberts promised. I didn't know if he was lying like there was no tomorrow or if MIIO and company were simply considerably better than whatever security experts the law firm had access to. Perhaps it didn't matter. There's more then. The most important part is the aerospace fighters. Roberts nodded. In comparison, the rest of the hardware is mundane, if numerous. He went for the bottom folder. I'll go with it first if that's all right. 10 APCs of various configurations, Field HQ, MASH, whatever that was. Multiple cargo trucks, a battle mech recovery vehicle, 18 towed artillery pieces, assorted infantry gear. Roberts looked back at us. Too much? I'm not a military man, yet I was shocked the first time the Baron contacted me in order to create his will. He offered us a wan smile at that. Please proceed, Mr. Roberts. I hope the continued shocks will have a lesser effect. If Mr. Vale is ready? He looked at me, and all I could do was nod numbly. Aerospace fighters and tanks are all that remain, he said in a chipper tone. I chuckled nervously at that. 10 heavy and 10 medium fighters, all supposedly on board of the Vengeance. Configuration unknown. They're all supposed to be factory new. It was true. The continued shocks had a lesser effect, or perhaps I was as shocked as I could be, and still somewhat functional. Do I dare ask about the tanks? Did I inherit a whole armored division too to round it all up? 80 armored fighting vehicles of different types, a mix of all classes. Roberts gave me something that might have been a reassuring smile, while I was pretty sure I was experiencing a heart attack. This had to be a dream, right? I was still back in the palace, drugged out of my mind and under interrogation. That made much more sense than this. Exiles, Part 4. Exiles. Delcatar, 2nd January 3015, Avalon City, New Avalon, Federated Sun. It turned out that I wasn't still at the palace, experiencing improbable hallucinations because of whatever the spooks pumped me full of. I hadn't necessarily gone crazy, unless my lawyer got the same malady at the same time too. To succinctly summarize, I just became a millionaire due to inheritance. A stretch, but not entirely unbelievable. Mum had been right, and next time I went to visit her grave, I needed to apologize for whatever that was worth. I had jump ships and drop ships, one of which was so rare I was certain I might be meeting the first prince himself to negotiate to buy it. The same undoubtedly went for some of the mechs and ASFs I was supposed to get once we found and inspected them. Fuck. With the state of the inner sphere after the last succession war, what I just inherited might rival the Federated Sun's yearly production of brand new mechs or come painfully close to it. How the fuck my father got his hands on so many brand new machines, well, I would love to know. Mammy I.O. would dearly love knowing too, not to mention the first prince too I was prepared to wager. Damn it, that was enough hardware to get killed over without a second thought. Or for people to risk stealing and fuck all consequences. We promptly left the building and pilled up into the car that transported us there, at which point I turned to my driver. You need to call your superiors. I'm unsure what they assumed I'll be inheriting, but if they knew it all, we would have come here with a small army. We're going to need a lot of security forces to properly secure military equipment right now, I blurted out. Mr. Vale isn't exaggerating, my lawyer helpfully pipped up. I'll call it in. My orders are to get you back to the palace unless there is a pressing need to go elsewhere. I glanced keenly at my lawyer. Properly securing the rest of your inheritance is a must, Mr. Vale. However, you're right. We'll require security before heading for the designated warehouses. What are we talking about? The driver asked while going after a powerful communication unit built into the car. At least a battalion worth of brand new equipment. Battle mechs, aerospace fighters, AFVs. The driver politely turned to stare wonderingly at us, as if we just spouted a second head apiece. 2 warehouses full of battle mechs right here in the capital city, with who knows what security. 2 more planetside, 1 with battle mechs, 1 with armor. Again, potentially with not enough security, protected by comparative obscurity at best. My lawyer explained earnestly. I suddenly got the sinking feeling that when we went to assume appropriate custody of my inheritance, there might be missing pieces, which wasn't good for all kinds of obvious reasons. You call it. I'm driving to the palace, the driver gleefully told the agent riding shotgun. Hold on! He got his security belt on and the engine roared, shooting the car forward at a decidedly unsafe speed. Exiles. We didn't get to return to the palace straight away. Instead, we naturally headed for the nearest warehouse, while the brass scrambled active troops from the closest bases to properly cover the various locations where my mechs were supposed to be. Another call went to the late Baron's law firm, which were all too eager to send a representative to meet us there. We spent the journey in relative silence, interrupted only by updates. It seemed that the local warehouses would be properly secured by the time we got there. I got proof of that when several helicopters and VTOLs raced above the city in the general direction we were heading. The trip at least gave me enough time to get to grips with what happened, and fortunately, my memory issues began to ultimately settle, so the drug's effect must be further weakening then. Good. This finally allowed me breathing room to think, which left me holding on to my self-control for dear life. Fuck. I was feeling like an innocent kid who just got all the Christmas presents he could wish for. Big stompy robots and I not only already piloted a training model, now I also owned my own, a considerable number of them. It was hard not to squee in childlike glee, at least until thinking about all the possible complications that undoubtedly came with my newfound prosperity. That didn't dash my ecstatic feelings, though it instantly put them back into perspective. Soon enough, we arrived at one of New Avalon's industrial districts, then headed towards a long row of massive warehouses. The place swarmed with workers, private security, and in one particular case, soldiers, not to mention the few helicopters and VTOLs either flying above or landed nearby. The soldiers' visible presence was enough to throw a wrench in the barely controlled chaos in the district. It slowed down multiple heavy haulers, which had to be even more careful now as they drove through the area. This being a real life instead of a holodrama, getting inside the warehouse wasn't as convenient as merely opening a door. Doing things by the book took more time. It took time to get the area supervisor, then my father's lawyer, as well as my lawyer. A further delay ensued in order to get key cards and codes necessary to gain access to the warehouse. All the while, there were many troopers and bystanders gawking at the circus, while foremen and shift supervisors tried to get the controlled chaos back into working order. So much for keeping this low-key. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lawyers and the warehouse's supervisor got the legalese straightened out, and we entered the warehouse. The place was cavernous and dark, at least until a worker got the lights going. At that point, I could see 2 long rows of tall storage spaces closed off by dull metal shutters. "It should be in the back," the supervisor announced after consulting his noteputer. He escorted us to the back of the warehouse and went to one of the terminals built in the wall beside each storage space. He inserted a key card, put in his code, then waved me to do the same. I followed suit after consulting the contents of the relevant folder. The metal shutter gradually rose with a near-deafening metal racket, revealing a beautiful, gleaming battle mech. It was a Valkyrie, perhaps the most common light mech in the Federated Sun's military. By the looks of it, it was brand new from the factory, lacking even a coat of paint. It was unarmed, too. There is a distinct vacant space on the left side of its chest, and its right arm was missing from below where the elbow would be, which were the hard points for the standard weapon configuration of this model, a medium laser and a long-range missile launcher, respectively. The supervisor whistled at that. "She's a beauty, ain't she?" I had piloted scout mechs before I discharged a few years back. He looked down at his noteputer, back at me, then at the lawyers. Don't tell me that I had multiple lances just gathering dust in one of my warehouses, the man exclaimed. "That's my understanding as well." I nodded sympathetically. The man bobbed his head in disbelief and steered us to the next storage space. There we found another gleaming Valkyrie and another in the one beside it. Half an hour later, I was officially the proud owner of 24 light mechs, 18 Valkyries, 2 Wasps, and 4 Stingers, all brand new, all thankfully unarmed, because if they received full combat loads, the odds of my father being a part of a potential coup would have skyrocketed. On one hand, I had my own big stompy robots. Well, not that big, but the sentiment was there. Yippee! On the other hand, I had a bunch of big stompy robots, yet I didn't have the personnel to keep them reasonably safe, much less make any use of them. This state of affairs would take time and resources to change. Once I got over geeking out, I turned to the officer of the platoon securing the area. "Lieutenant, can we make arrangements to transport and temporarily store the mechs at one of the closest military bases?" "I've got my comm specialist on the horn with command. I'll get back to you as soon as I'm aware of any arrangements being made, sir." "Good. That's excellent. You might want to ask about arrangements for about whatever we find at the other locations," I added. "Other locations, sir?" The lieutenant, who if anything was a bit younger than me, stared at me as if he didn't comprehend what he was gazing at. Well, I didn't look like your typical noble, yet here I was receiving 6 standard lances worth of battle mechs, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. "Yes, the other locations." I nodded without elaborating. Half an hour later, we received confirmation that an engineering company was on its way here with enough transport for all the mechs, along with even more security. After that, instead of taking the car, we pilled up in one of the VTOLs hanging around. We, meaning me, my lawyer, my father's lawyer, and 2 of my MIIO shadows. As soon as we got strapped safely within the troop compartment, the armed transport tore towards the other end of the city, where the next group of mechs waited for me to take possession of them. The third warehouse holding the 4 heavies was about 200 kilometers away from Avalon City, which meant another trip with the VTOL was in my future. When we got to the second warehouse, the whole area was a circus, complete with news crew held back by private security and police, while the place in question was surrounded by at least 2 companies of infantry. The local supervisor was already in place, waiting for us with the relevant paperwork, key cards, and codes, so this time around things proceeded faster. Inside, the warehouse was almost identical to the previous one, and the only notable difference was the color of the metal shutters. These were painted dark pink, of all things. I glanced at the supervisor, who shrugged helplessly. "Not my idea," she said. This time we found the mechs in the middle of the warehouse. Opening the first storage space revealed an enforcer towering proudly over us. Going by its looks, it was fresh from the factory, too, which naturally kept ringing alarm bells in my head. They became deafening when I noted a distinct difference between this medium mech and my lights. The enforcer was very much armed, as its huge autocannon towering right above my head demonstrated. The other 5 enforcers we found side by side had their warloads as well. However, it was anyone's guess if they had any ammo loaded. Across from them, we found the other 6 mediums, this time Wolverines. And at the sight of them, I found myself bouncing on my feet in glee. If there was a single battle mech I fell in love with aesthetics, wise the moment I saw it, it was the Wolverine. Once the necessary arrangements to move my medium mechs to a more secure location were in place, we found ourselves in the air again, heading out of the city at flank speed. Our destination turned out to be one of the small towns surrounding the capital. This one was, for all intents and purposes, a major logistics hub, complete with acres worth of warehouses for all kinds of cargo lowing from or to New Avalon. We landed at the far right corner of the warehouse complex, which was lit up by military helicopters and a couple of VTOL gunship variants ominously circling above it. Once on the ground, we approached a terribly nervous young manager who wasted no time with pleasantries or the legalities of the matter. Instead, the lad was eager to get this unexpected invasion out of his area of responsibility. He had one of the shift supervisors usher us to a relatively small warehouse, which was supposed to contain my heavy mechs. I certainly hope so. Otherwise, I didn't want to imagine the additional chaos that searching for 4 missing war machines might cause. We went through the same dance once again, and a dark green shutter went up, revealing yet the largest mech I saw today. It was impossible to mistake the Jaeger mech's rough outline. And it was armed, too. Its presence caused a commotion among the people around me, the lawyers, spooks, and a squad of soldiers who undoubtedly wondered what kinds of shenanigans they got roped into. Frankly, I was beginning to wonder, too. Who the hell could get their hands on so many brand new machines and keep them stored around or inside New Avalon City of all places, with none the wiser until recently? When the next shutter opened, revealing a second Jaeger mech, I found myself unable to feel any more shocks today, though the 3rd and 4th storage spaces tested that assumption. 2 unpainted black knights flanked me, standing in mock attention. While I stared at the last 2 battle mechs I inherited, my mind struggled to process today's events. I was in a daze when I got up in the VTOL a bit later, and we headed towards the palace. To be honest, until I in fact obtained rightful possession of the mechs, I didn't believe that even a faction of them might really be fresh from the factory. In this day and age, brand new mechs were very rare. I wasn't jesting when I thought that my inheritance might represent a significant chunk of the number of new battle mechs the Federated Suns could produce each year. To say that this was tremendous would be such an understatement, which meant that I might be meeting the first prince in person very soon. It would be an honor, one that practically made me squee with glee again. And if I was to be honest with myself, it was going to complicate my life to no end, just like the inheritance did, even if solved my financial woes. Battletech Exiles, 4th Chapter 3, Parts 1 and 2. Chapter 3, Exiles. Part 1, Exiles. Hans Davion. 2nd January 3015. Avalon City, New Avalon. Federated Suns. It was early in the afternoon, yet he already felt like a drink wouldn't be amiss. As it turned out, everyone in the know underestimated Baron Vonnegut's reach and connections. 40 battle mechs fresh from the factory. 2 of them 75-ton Black Knights of all things. which currently only had a single partially operational factory building parts for them in the whole inner sphere. It had been years, if not decades, since anyone built a single new machine of that particular model. Then there were the fighters, and he wouldn't bet against them being brand new as well. This whole mess had either a coup or a major smuggling operation written all over it. Possibly both, and it largely caught Mio unaware. Trustin was going to be fiendishly busy in the days and weeks to come. The same was true for MIO as a whole, along with everyone tasked with internal security and counter-espionage. Their investigations may or may not be enough to uncover whatever was happening. That is why I already have Ran preparing to leave on an inspection tour to examine the various factories and what production they might have misplaced. The Valkyrie production lines here and the Wolverine ones at Marduk were among his primary targets. He would be leaving as soon as a proper auditor. An investigation team could assemble to accompany him. With that particular crisis hopefully contained, he could finally turn his attention back to what started this mess in the first place. The two potentially reincarnated people he had to work with, whom now found themselves entangled by political complications. Vale's inheritance, a whole combined arms battalion, along with the prerequisite transport currently on New Avalon or in the system, would have been enough by itself to garner his attention. Securing said equipment and transporting it to safe storage at the nearest military bases in New Avalon City's vicinity didn't happen quietly. With the potential risk of a coup scheme being involved, securing those machines took precedence to being stealthy. While dealing with the media as a consequence was going to cause him some headaches, the public nature of today's development might offer certain boons as well. "Sire, Lady Yvonne Davian is here to see you," Hance's secretary announced, bringing his contemplation to an end. "Send her in." He massaged his neck and sharply moved his head left and right, hearing an unpleasant crack as stiff muscle and joints relaxed a bit. He sorted out the documents he had been working on and greeted his champion when she entered his office. "Yvonne," Hance offered her his trademark smile. "You're plotting again, aren't you?" Yvonne chided lightly. "I'm merely doing my job," he countered. "I have a few cunning plans to run by you." Here we go again. Exile. Delcatar. The VTOL landed, and a few seconds later, the rear ramp opened to a well-lit landing pad. The spooks shadowing me went out first, followed by my temporary lawyer. Finally, gathering the energy to release myself from the security harness, I stagger out into the waiting hands of a security detail. A lieutenant, about my age, saluted and escorted us inside. He led us through a labyrinth-like set of corridors, where we passed by security personnel and the odd maintenance worker. Eventually, we reached a more lively part of the palace, which immediately made me feel decidedly underdressed. I felt terribly out of place when we went higher, into a part of the palace where majors probably served coffee and cadets like me usually had no business visiting. In just a few minutes, I saw more brass in person than I had seen in my life until now, parades included. Most people were in a hurry, a noticeable change compared to my earlier visit. Before long, we passed through a few familiar corridors, went by Yvonne Davian's office, and headed even deeper into the building. We reached a nearby section with even heavier security than any other part of the building I visited in the past couple of days. I was reasonably sure I knew where we were headed, and while I was aware of the possibility, the mere thought of meeting Hansa Davion in person was humbling. Or would be, if there wasn't a part of me giddy at the prospect. 2 checkpoints later, we approached the end of a long corridor and entered a lofty waiting room that wasn't sure what it wanted to be. There were half a dozen people working at terminals, 10 more currently unoccupied desks, and a number of security types. Yet, the other side of the room contained a number of comfortable-looking armchairs, 2 couches with low tables in between them. That part of the waiting room, mixed up with an outer office, had the vibe of a particularly expensive and, more importantly, exclusive club. It was probably set up so knobs who had to wait for the prince to see him wouldn't bitch too much or be too disruptive. We didn't have to wait as my two shadows stood at attention near the entrance, while one of the guards ushered Kenneth and myself into the prince's office. The place was impressive. It was almost as vast as the waiting room outside. It was carefully divided in various sections by neatly set-up furniture. In one corner hid a cozy couch, 2 armchairs, and a coffee table of polished, dusky wood. Another section contained large video screens and terminals. A relatively small open space followed, leading to the prince's impressive desk and the seats arranged in front of it. Right now, the desk was mostly empty, containing only Davion's personal terminal, a stack of papers, and a pair of pens in a silver holder. On the other side, there was a statue I had never seen before, yet had known more about than almost everyone else in the inner sphere. Prince Davion wasn't alone. In fact, I at first thought he wasn't here, and instead we would be waiting for him along with Lady Yvonne Davion. It turned out that I was mistaken, as he was in the far corner of the office, looking over New Avalon through a darkened window. The prince's champion greeted me with a smile. "Cadet Vale, it's good to see you still in one piece. You had a particularly thrilling day, I understand." "Kenneth, it's always a pleasure." She beamed at my lawyer. "The pleasure is mine, my dear lady." He bowed and kissed Lady Davion's offered hand. Hans Davion turned around with a smile gracing his face. "Cadet Vale, it's good to finally meet you." Seeing him in pictures or on the holo didn't do him justice. The first price was larger than life, with a charisma and presence that effortlessly grabbed your attention. "Your Highness." I stood at attention and saluted. "None of that, Cadet." Davion returned my salute before waving at me. "This is one of the few places where I prefer to keep all the pomp away, if at all possible. Mr. Kenneth." He nodded at my lawyer and walked around his desk, leaning on it. The prince glanced my way and pointed at a nearby chair. "Sit, Cadet, and relax." That was much easier said than done. I did make my way to the offered chair and carefully sat down, contemplating my every move in a hope not to fuck up by the numbers. Only now did I get a better look at the prince himself. He wore a plain dark suit and physically wasn't a particularly imposing man. Nevertheless, it almost looked like the room was too small to keep him inside. I wasn't certain if that was me freaking out or if the man was simply that charismatic in person. This was certainly nothing like seeing him on the holo. "Now, before we go any further, do you consent to revealing your particular status to Kenneth here?" The first prince caught me off guard with that question. "Sire?" I asked numbly. The prince's champion explained. "You're likely going to require legal advice before we're done here tonight, Cadet Vale. Baron Kenneth is one of the few lawyers with the necessary security clearance to assist you. And currently, you are his client with all the confidentiality that entails." I wasn't certain I liked where this was going. The prince then spoke up, gaining my full attention. "I do have an offer or two for you, Cadet Vale, and you might require legal advice about them. In order for a solicitor to offer you the best possible advice under the circumstances, they'll need to be aware of the situation." Paradoxically, now that I actually had the money to hire the best lawyers money could buy, I was in a situation I couldn't trust the great majority of them anyway. Not with this. Not with the secret stuck in my head. On the other hand, trusting Kenneth further, well, this had conflict of interests written all over it. "You're wondering how much you can trust me, aren't you, Mr. Vale?" Kenneth inquired. "That's unfortunately true. Legally, I'm bound to keep your confidence and to offer you the best advice I can," the old man pointed out. Yet, here and now, that was less reassuring than it should have been. "That's all I can offer you, Mr. Vale. My word and my reputation are my bond." "What do you have in mind, sire?" I bit the bullet and addressed the first prince. "I need to know more about the situation before I can decide if I should share my status with Mr. Kenneth." "Prudent enough," Davion cheerfully responded. "I have a number of propositions for you to consider, Cadet. We all know about the boons you received today. They could be of great use to the Federated Sons. I have a few tasks within the Oregon Reach that need to be completed with discretion, and a young, loyal Federated Sun citizen who just inherited enough assets to form up his own mercenary company would fit the bill nicely, especially one that won't be explicitly connected with our government." The prince smiled crookedly. At that moment, he didn't give out the impression of a fox, but instead of a particularly twisted and villainous weasel, one with a dastardly plan at that. A deniable asset, I muttered, my mind racing like never before. The Oregon Reach, this could mean only one thing: the Argo, the data she contained, and the potential prize at the end of that road. And if there is a certain young firebrand eager to play Mechwarrior and mercenary, like in all those famous Hollow movies, I prompted, then I would be indebted to that enterprising individual. Hansi kept smiling cheerfully at me. Kenneth interjected. Establishing a mercenary company and making sure all the necessary paperwork and permits are in place would definitely require the service of a lawyer. There is nothing unusual about it. It is a standard service, really. Many mercenary companies retain links with great houses. Sometimes they even exclusively serve a single realm or those friendly and/or neutral to it. The prince then continued with, "That's what I'm proposing, at least on paper, Cadet Vale. However, our links would need to remain confidential until your work in the Oregon Reach is done. Whether you agree or disagree to that particular proposition, I would still like to purchase your vengeance carrier along with—" This was going to be one very long evening, I just knew it. I was reasonably sure that by the end of it, Hansa Davion would not only swindle me in one way or another, but make me feel grateful for it. Exiles. Part 2. Exiles. Delcatar. 2nd January 3015. Avalon City, New Avalon, Federated Suns. Hours of bargaining followed, which were conceivably the longest hours in either life I could recall. At the same time, the first prince haggled like an experienced swindler who negotiated with almost childlike glee. He at least was delighted about fleecing me and making me feel grateful for it. Me, on the other hand, I had decidedly mixed feelings during the negotiations. Operating a vengeance gets relatively expensive, Hansa confided. I would know. The Federated Suns possesses a number of them. 40 fighter berths, I countered. If there was one good thing about the prolonged bargaining, it was that as time passed, I felt a bit less starstruck. Thus, I was more decisive when trying to defend my position. Air support and friendly skies make up for all kinds of tactical sins. It's a bit less vital when tactical mishaps can be avoided. I'm certain I can find you a handful of competent ground force officers to help avoid any unfortunate blunders. Hans cheerfully offered. Furthermore, you are about to inherit only 20 fighters. Running a vengeance half empty is a waste, and you would be hard-pressed to find 20 fighters and pilots to fully utilize the bays. Damn it, he was right about that. Although the vengeance was supposed to come with a crew and pilots, I am supposed to meet them when they arrive at the Nadir jump point in a few days. I wonder if they would want to stay with the vengeance. You know, I might know of a union in carrier configuration available to lease. Hansi stroked his chin in contemplation. How does that sound? I'll purchase the vengeance at a reasonable price after we've arranged a smaller carrier for your aerospace assets. It sounds like a potential deal, I hedged. I'll need to know more about the union in question. Does it have a crew, for example, and will the pilots agree to transition from the vengeance? Why lease instead of purchase? Playing it that way might be for the best. You've met my formerly Capellan guest? He inquired. The young woman who was all over the news not so long ago? What was that all about anyway? She looked like she saw a ghost when we met. Yes, that particular lady. She is the owner of the union in question. Hans nodded, while his champion directed a reproachful look at him. That wasn't my idea. He raised both hands in a mock surrender while looking at Yvonne. even if it was worth a shot to see what would happen. Unless you clear Kenneth here about your circumstances, we won't be discussing details about Ms. Leng at this time, Yvonne Davion stated. What does that woman have to do with my situation? The infamous question, how is the weather in Strana Mechti, came to mind, but she didn't appear to be a clanner. What did that leave? And how deep did the fucking rabbit hole go? She's like me? I asked in disbelief. More or less. Hans nodded and looked pointedly at Kenneth. Might as well tell him. I rubbed my forehead. How many people awoke with a second set of memories as of late? Yvonne Davion offered Kenneth a brief explanation, and to his credit, he didn't look at us like escapees from the nearest lunatic asylum. Do I dare ask what you hope my client will find in the Oregon Reach, my prince? A game changer, Hansi succinctly responded. Kenneth gazed at me with a far-off look in his eyes. Mr. Vale, many people in your shoes would enjoy their newfound fortunes in peace and security. It would be improper of me not to give you the best advice I can. Becoming a mercenary, state-sponsored or not, remains a dangerous, uncertain business at the best of times. That is why I feel compelled to ask, why would you consider taking such a road when you have excellent alternatives? This is a pertinent question, Cadet Vale. Hansi agreed. It was, and it wasn't one I knew how to properly answer. Thinking about it, why not merely enjoy being a multi-millionaire on New Avalon instead of risking my life and fortune to become a mercenary commander? I have always dreamed of being a battle mech pilot. At that, both Davians nodded in understanding, while Kenneth offered me a long, suffered look. I also want to see as much of the inner sphere as I can in relative safety. So not going anywhere near Combine or Liao space without a big fucking army. Then there is the fact I know how far we've fallen in the past few centuries. Somehow I find myself in the unique position to perhaps do something about it, to ensure my brothers and sisters grow up and eventually grow old in a better world. That last part was almost entirely Delcatar Vale, the one who grew up on New Avalon, but not quite. That's an impossible goal you place in front of yourself, Kenneth began, then paused. You're not merely boasting about what you want to achieve, are you? That's my own long-term goal as well, Kenneth, Hans pointed out. I know, my prince, it's just that... Kenneth sighed. I'm a green behind-the-ears youngster who doesn't really know how the world properly works, I asked. There's that. I've seen my own share of young people either receive an ancestral mech or otherwise join a mercenary company to never return. A few of them did indeed create their own mercenary outfit, and they're almost all gone now, Kenneth explained. There were many reasons why I never seriously contemplated becoming a mercenary, and instead did all I could to be accepted in a military academy. The retirement prospects are much better, especially when you have a family to look after. That's commendable, and I'm not merely stating it as your commander-in-chief, Cadet. Hans offered me his approval. We, however, digress. Under different circumstances, I might have bargained for your scout jump ship. However, it could be pretty useful during your trip to the Oregon Reach. Once again, he had that thoughtful look, like a weasel contemplating how to best raid a chicken coop. The man wasn't a fox. He was much worse, I was beginning to understand. We have to talk with Ms. Leng, Hansi said with a gleam in his eyes. However, let's first conclude the rest of our negotiations. Battle mechs-wise, I propose to exchange your 2 Black Knights for a pair of Marauders, alongside a generous allowance of spare parts. I want MIIO to take them apart and figure out how your father got his hands on 2 brand new units. To the best of my knowledge, there is only one factory producing a limited assortment of spare parts for them, and it is in the Free Worlds League, Hans explained. I believe I can provisionally agree. I'll need a few more details on the deal. Good. I can assure you that I'm not about to take advantage of you, Cadet. Loyalty goes both ways. The first prince said in a deadly serious tone, sobering the mood. Further, I'll require an exchange, one for one of every type mech, aerospace fighter, and AFV you inherited. I need to identify their origins. And again, the thought that my father might have been part of a potential coup surfaced within my mind. I understand, sire. To tell the truth, I'm surprised you aren't attempting to simply buy most of my assets. I'll need more details about the swap, one-on-one exchange for brand new machines, used but fully refurbished mechs and spare parts. The thought crossed my mind. However, if you agree to my proposal, you'll be utilizing them to advance the Federated Sun's interests, Hans declared solemnly. Swap one-on-one basis, new machines of the same model if practical or equivalents. We'll negotiate for spare parts and supplies depending on what's available. Another reason not to push for more of your assets, Cadet Vale. Well, I'm about to blow up an Atlas-sized hole into the budget, he declared gleefully, something decidedly odd considering what he just said. This brings us back to Miss Lang. You mentioned she had a Union carrier. Good for her. Then again, how did a political refugee get her hands on one? Did she manage to snag it as her way to the Federated Suns? Cadet, you aren't the only one who received a fascinating inheritance on their 20th birthday yesterday. Yvonne began filling in the blanks. Although most of hers should be arriving in the system tomorrow evening. And then I'm going to break the budget. Hans nodded happily. Do I want to know? I jerked my head to look at the prince's champion. Sometimes he's that way, especially when he has a particularly clever idea. Yvonne waved at the grinning first prince with a faint smile of her own. She's supposed to receive enough hardware to form her own combined arms battalion of SLDF grade gear, Hans confided. And we're going to offer her a sweet deal, one I hope she won't refuse. You know she won't refuse. Yvonne's smile dimmed. There's that. Now the prince's own grin vanished. We're still offering her the most lucrative deal I could think of. Hans directed his attention back to me. Now before we go visit my guest, let's talk personnel. I understand you have crews for the Union and Vengeance? If negotiations pan out, I confirmed. First, just to be clear, you agree to go to the Oregon Reach? Yes, sire, it's worth a shot. I gave the first prince a meaningful look, which he returned. Good. It's decided then. Personnel-wise, here are my thoughts.